Hello, dreamer. Welcome to Whispers of Time, where history breathes softly in the dark and every story is a lullaby from the past. Close your eyes and imagine Caleb Morgan stood at the bow of the steamer Rosamond, coat open to the cold, and let the salt-stung air slap his face raw. He could not feel his ears. He could not feel his fingers. He could, however, feel his future. Ahead of him, through veils of drifting gray, the world rose white and jagged, mountains like broken teeth, ridges iced over with hard blue light, a coast that did not look like part of the earth at all, but something older, something that had been here before men had names. Alaska. "Last chance to turn around," called a voice behind him. Caleb didn't move at first. He liked how the cold stripped him down to the truth. Where he came from didn't matter. What he'd been didn't matter. Only that line out there where the water met the mist. That was all that mattered. Finally, he turned. The man speaking to him leaned casual against a coil of wet rope, hat low, cigarette cupped in his hands to shield the little flame from the wind. He was older than Caleb by maybe 20 years, but men who live on the edges of maps rarely carry their age in smooth numbers. His beard was broken with gray, his coat patched a dozen times, his knuckles scarred up like river stones. He had the manner of someone who watched everything and said only what was necessary. Caleb had met him 2 days ago, after boarding in Skagway. The others called him Pike. "I won't turn around," Caleb said. Pike smiled with only half his mouth. "That's exactly what the last one said, before he did." Caleb didn't ask what happened to the last one. He was sharp enough to know when a man was testing him, and proud enough not to show that he heard the warning under the words. Instead, he said, "How long until we make land?" "Depends," Pike said. "On what?" "On whether the captain decides he loves us more than he fears the rocks." Pike flicked ash off to the water. "And on whether the Barlow gang's still running the inlet." Caleb glanced toward him. "Bandits on the water?" Pike chuckled. "Son," he said softly, like he'd just been handed some private amusement. "There are bandits everywhere. Men convince themselves there's easy money. You'll see that fast enough. You've got that look." "What look?" "The look of a man who thinks he's going north for gold," Pike said. "Men who think they're going north for gold bleed easy." Caleb lifted his chin. "What are you going north for?" Pike's eyes glinted. "To see who bleeds." They stood together in the cold a few breaths longer. The Rosamond pushed through broken panes of brash ice and streaks of winter slush, her iron hull growling. Above them, gulls screamed and wheeled like angry scraps of paper. Caleb tried not to shiver. He had one coat. It wasn't enough. He had boots meant for Montana winters, which he had once been foolish enough to believe were severe. He had a canvas pack with what he called supplies: coffee in a twist of paper, flint, a thin blanket, a hunting knife that had belonged to his father, and 3 biscuits wrapped in a handkerchief his sister had sewn, back before he left, and before she cried, and before he lied and told her, "I'll be home by spring, with enough for all of us." It was not spring. It was 1897, and the world had split open at the top like a seam, and all the stories pouring down from Dawson and the Klondike said the same thing. Gold. Gold in the riverbeds, gold in the black sand. Gold in the gravel so thick you could scoop it with your hands and see it shine in the sun like sugar. Men in saloons in Whitehorse swore to it. Drifters with frostbitten ears swore to it. One man with two missing fingers and a laugh like a rusted hinge had slammed a little ragged poke on the bar and spilled out enough yellow to blind the room. Caleb had watched that. He had watched, and he had felt something awaken in his chest like a struck match. Not greed. He would never have named it greed. Something hungrier. Freedom. Because back in Montana there was the farm and the debt and his father coughing blood into his hands. There was the sheriff at the door and talk of selling the North Field, the last good ground they had. There was his mother's quiet, unbroken grief, stretched so thin it made the house silent. There was his sister, June, with her hands cracked from washing, and her hair pinned up like a woman twice her age, and the way she looked at him when he said, "I'll bring it back, I swear." He hadn't been able to stand that look, so when the first whisper of Klondike came flitting like a fever through the train station and the freight yards and the timber camps, Caleb did what young men have always done when the world calls them by name. He answered. He sold his horse. He took his father's rifle. He kissed June's forehead and told her that in 1 year she would be wearing a silk dress from San Francisco, and their mother would have running water in the kitchen, and their father would have a doctor, a real one, I swear to God, Pa. I swear. His father had smiled in a way that said he did not believe him, and that the not believing hurt more than the coughing. And then Caleb had gone north. North past the last fences. North past the last train stop. North past where the U.S. postal maps began to look blurry and uncertain. Now, standing on the bow of a steamer, trembling through freezing water, he let the wind bite him because that pain was clean. It was the kind of pain that meant you were getting somewhere. The sky darkened, not evening dark, storm dark. The Rosamond rolled slow, then harder. Men on deck started securing crates, cinching rope. Somewhere aft, a barrel broke loose and clanged across the boards until someone cursed and threw their weight against it. The air changed, too. The sharp, cold smell of open water thickened into something that tasted like iron and rain. Pike ground his cigarette out on the rail and flicked it into the sea. "That's our cue," he said. Caleb frowned. "Cue for what?" "To get below," Pike said, already moving. "Storm's going to sit on us like a drunk on payday." "I can handle a little weather," Caleb said. Pike didn't even slow. "You're not from here, son. Up here, the weather doesn't ask if you can handle it." Caleb hesitated. A part of him wanted to stay, to plant himself like a mast and stare down whatever came, to prove, to Pike, to the crew, to himself, that he was not just some boy from a worn-out farm with more hope than sense. Then the first blast hit. The wind struck so hard and sudden it nearly threw him backward. Snow came with it, not soft, dry snow, but wet knives. The gray sky turned black, just like that, and the world dropped into roaring. The ship rose, then fell. Caleb stumbled, grabbed a slick length of rope, and felt his stomach lurch as the bow dropped into a trough so deep the world ahead of them vanished. The Rosamond shuddered. Someone shouted, "All hands below! Move!" The deck canted. Caleb's boots slipped on ice-slick boards. For a heartbeat, he was weightless, hanging over gray water churning with broken ice, and in that heartbeat, he understood how men disappeared on the way north and were never spoken of again. He clawed himself upright and ran. The hold smelled of oil and damp canvas, and of men too long unwashed in too little space. Lamplight swung in sickle arcs from iron hooks as the ship rolled. Bodies jammed shoulder to shoulder on rough planks. backpacks, crates, bedrolls, rifles, breathing. The low mutter of prayer. Someone vomiting into a bucket. Caleb squeezed in, bracing himself between a stack of flour sacks and a barrel marked salt pork. His heart was still racing. Pike wedged in across from him, expression unreadable, like he'd ridden out 100 such storms and found every one of them boring. The ship bucked again. Wood boomed. Above them, something cracked with a sound like a gunshot. A man in a wool cap whispered, "Christ have mercy." Pike said, without looking up, "Christ doesn't come this far north. You boys ain't heard?" A few men gave a strangled laugh. It wasn't really funny, but it helped. Caleb wiped melting snow from his face and tried to slow his breathing. The lamplight made everyone look ghost-pale and older than they were. Hard men with frost-burned cheeks. Thin men who looked like they hadn't eaten steady in weeks. One woman, hair braided tight, jaw set, eyes flat and steady like river stones, sat on a trunk cleaning under her fingernails with a knife and did not react to the roll of the ship at all. She caught Caleb looking. He looked away. "What's your plan, farm boy?" Pike asked him, as if they were sitting on a porch instead of inside a metal-bellied animal being punched by the sea. "My plan?" Caleb repeated. "Yeah," Pike said. "When we make land. Say you get lucky. Say you don't drown here. Don't freeze out there. Don't get your gear stolen at the pass. Don't break a leg hauling a year's worth of supplies over Chilkoot. Say you pass through all that like water through fingers and end up on the other side with 2 hands, 2 feet, and a working back. Then what?" Caleb swallowed. "I'm going to find a claim," he said. He heard how young it sounded and pushed his voice lower, steadier. "I'll find a creek nobody's worked yet, and I'll stake it legal. I'll work from dawn to dark. I'll pan what I can, and I'll dig where I have to. I'll follow any sign of color. I'll stay through the winter if I have to. I don't care if it takes a year. I don't care if it takes 2. "Those are pretty words," Pike said, "but that ain't a plan." Caleb felt heat rise to his face. "So what's your plan?" Pike smiled again with half his mouth. "I'm going to take yours." Caleb blinked. A few of the men nearby laughed, thinking Pike was joking. Pike wasn't joking. He leaned forward just slightly, enough that Caleb could see there was humor in his eyes, but absolutely no softness. "You ain't the only one with dreams, son. Some men work for 'em. Some men wait for other men to do the working and then take the result. Up north, we call the first kind fools and the second kind alive." Caleb stared at him. "That's what I meant about bandits," Pike said calmly. "They're not just the boys with scarves over their faces and rifles across the trail. Sometimes they're the men you eat with, sleep beside, call friend. Sometimes they're the ones who offer to watch your gear while you scout ahead. Sometimes they're the smiling partners who say, 'We'll split it even,' and then you don't wake up in the morning." The ship slammed down on another wave so hard, everyone in the hold lurched and swore. Caleb's stomach clenched. Barrels rolled against their ropes, and the hanging lamps swung wildly, throwing shadows like knives. "Welcome to the north," Pike said. Caleb managed. "Why tell me this now?" Pike shrugged. "Because you looked out at that ice like it was a church. I figured I should ruin it for you before it ruins you." Caleb opened his mouth to answer, but then the Rosamond screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of metal meeting rock. The floor under them jumped. Men were thrown like dice. One of the lamps tore loose and smashed, oil splashing and flame licking up the wall. Somebody yelled, "Rock! We're on a But the ship lurched again, and the rest of the sentence drowned in chaos. Water exploded through the seams, cold, immediate, alive. In a single heartbeat, the hold went from cramped and loud to frantic and deadly. "Move!" Pike's voice cut through it, sharp as a whip crack. "Get up, all of you! Up, up!" The cold hit Caleb's boots and shot through him like a spike. He grabbed his pack on instinct, slinging it over his shoulder. Men shoved and clawed and fought for the ladder. Someone slipped and vanished under churning black water that was suddenly knee-deep, then thigh-deep. The woman with the braid was already climbing, knife between her teeth, eyes narrowed and steady. The Rosamond groaned again. Caleb waded into water that felt like knives and forced himself forward. His muscles screamed. Breath burned in his lungs. Hands dragged at him. "Help me! Help me, kid!" But Pike yanked him hard and shouted, "Not now! Move!" They burst onto the main deck and into night. The storm had swallowed the world. Snow ripped in sheets, blinding, furious. The wind howled so hard it felt like a living thing, trying to tear them loose and cast them into the dark. The sea was a heaving, boiling thing of black water and white foam and shards of ice slamming and tearing at the hull. The ship had struck something, a reef, a hidden outcrop, God knew what. And now she was listing, grinding, dying. Caleb couldn't hear anything but the storm. Couldn't see more than a few feet past his own hands. Men were running. Someone was trying to cut free one of the lifeboats. Another man was praying aloud, a voice high and broken. Over everything, the captain's voice roared, torn and furious. "Get the cargo! Leave the cargo, you fools! Save yourselves!" The deck jerked sideways. Caleb's foot went out from under him, and he slammed down hard enough to see white. He tasted blood. Cold water rolled across the deck and tried to pull him toward the railing, toward the black water beyond it. Then Pike's hand closed on his collar and hauled. Caleb staggered up. "I can't." "Shut up," Pike snapped. "Listen to me. You see that light?" Caleb blinked through snow and stinging salt. At first he saw nothing but chaos. Then, there, between howling gusts, a pale, flickering glow. Farther than felt safe. Closer than felt possible. Land. "Yes," Caleb said. "Good," Pike said. "You swim for it." Caleb stared. "Swim?" "That's the word I used." Pike's jaw was set against the wind. "Rosamond's going down. You feel how she's settling? She's not coming back up. There's no heroics now, no brave men with ropes and songs. You jump, you swim, you get to shore, you keep your blood moving. Understand?" Caleb's heart hammered. "What about you?" Pike grinned that half-grin. "I'll be right behind you." Lightning split the sky, just for an instant. In that instant, Caleb saw everything too clearly. The waves like black mountains, the shattered lifeboat, half smashed against the davits, men clinging to rails, faces twisted with animal fear. The broken spine of the Rosamond grinding on unseen rock, Pike's eyes. And in Pike's eyes he saw calculation. Not cruelty, not kindness. Just math. Caleb understood something in that moment, something that would keep him breathing later, when sane men would have lain down in the snow and let the dark take them. Nobody is coming to save you. You either swim or you sink. You either fight or you vanish. You either become the man the North demands, or the North eats you and forgets your name. He nodded once. Pike clapped him hard on the shoulder. "Go, Montana." Caleb didn't let himself think. Thinking was for warm rooms and safe hours. Out here you moved or you died. he climbed the rail. The ship lurched under him. Wind tore at him. Ice stung his face and filled his mouth. For half a heartbeat, he hovered between the barely solid world of the ship and the boiling black of the sea. Then he jumped. The cold was a weapon. It struck every inch of him at once, driving the air from his lungs in a violent gasp he couldn't control. The water felt alive, clawing, grabbing, dragging him down. There was no up, no down, no surface, only dark and pain. He thrashed. His pack tried to pull him under. He fought it, hands numb, fingers clumsy. Instinct roared louder than thought. Get free, get up, breathe, breathe, breathe. He tore the straps loose and felt the weight fall away. He kicked. His boots felt like anvils. His coat filled with freezing water and dragged at him. His chest burned. His throat burned. His eyes burned. Then his head broke the surface, and he sucked in air like a drowning animal, coughing, choking, gasping. Waves slammed him, spun him. The world was howling black and jagged white, and the taste of salt and iron. The light. Find the light. He blinked ice from his lashes. For one heartbeat, the storm's rage opened just enough for him to see it again. That pale flicker, that candle glow in the dark. Shore. He swam. He swam with arms that felt like wood and legs that felt like stone. He swam as the North tried to stop his heart by freezing his blood in his veins. He swam with the memory of his sister's cracked hands and his father's cough and his mother's silence like a grave. He swam because he had not come this far to die nameless in black water. A wave lifted him and hurled him forward. For an instant his knees scraped something hard and jagged, ice, rock, both, and he clawed at it. His numb fingers slipped. He tried again. This time he caught a ridge of ice and held on with a sound that wasn't quite human. His whole body shook. He dragged himself forward, scraping his palms bloody and not feeling it. His boots found purchase. His shoulder slammed against something solid, a half-submerged rock, slick as bone. He heaved himself farther, inch by inch, until the water no longer sucked at his waist, then his thighs, then his knees. He collapsed face first onto something that wasn't quite shore, but wasn't the black water either. Frozen gravel, ice-crusted sand. It didn't matter. It was not drowning. He lay there and shook and sucked air through clenched teeth, the way men do when the pain is so large the body doesn't know where to put it. After a time, he could not have said if it was seconds or an hour. He rolled onto his back. Snow hit his face. The storm still howled. The light still flickered. Alive, he thought, dazed. I'm alive. He had never been so cold. He had also never been so certain he would not die here. He pushed himself up, every joint screaming, and staggered toward the light. It wasn't a town. That was his first disappointment. In his mind, in that brief, desperate swim, he had imagined a harbor, rough but human. A dock, maybe, a warehouse. Some hard men with blankets and whiskey, a stove throwing out heat, and somebody laughing too loud. What he found was a lantern on a driftwood post and a shack that looked like it had been dropped by accident. The shack leaned like it was tired. The roof sagged under snow. The door hung crooked. One small square of yellow leaked at the seams. No sound came from inside over the storm. No voices. No movement, but it was shelter. Right now, shelter was holy. Caleb stumbled through knee-deep snow, boots sloshing, coat frozen into stiff armor that cracked when he moved. Every part of him shook so violently, it felt like his bones would rattle loose inside him. His teeth clicked so hard he thought they might shatter. He reached the door, fumbled with his numb hands for the latch, and shoved. The door resisted, then banged inward. Warmth hit him like a blow. Not real warmth, not the kind you feel standing too close to a cook stove in a tight kitchen, but the ghost of it. Old warmth. The air inside the shack wasn't warm now, but it had known warmth recently, and compared to the howling white outside, it felt like stepping into summer. He staggered in and slammed the door behind him. For a long moment he just leaned there, forehead against rough wood, chest heaving. He was dimly aware of the room around him. A single space, low-ceilinged, lantern hanging from a beam, its flame turned down low. A rough plank table, a chair, a cot in the corner covered in furs, a small iron stove with its door closed and cold ash spilling from its seam, crates stacked along one wall, tools, a coil of snare wire, a saw, a rifle hanging on pegs. No people. He was alone. He pushed off from the door and almost fell again. His legs barely remembered how to work. His fingers were useless chunks of meat. He needed heat. He needed out of the wet. He needed to move, because if he stopped moving now, he wasn't going to start again. He lurched toward the stove. His hands wouldn't bend. He had to use his wrists to fumble the latch open. The little iron door swung, and a puff of cold ash dusted his face. Empty. He looked around, vision tunneling, mind clumsy from cold. Firewood. He needed wood. There, in the corner, stacked neat as books. Split logs dry. Thank God. He dropped to his knees. They thudded on the plank floor, and he barely felt it. He dragged 2 logs back to the stove, then 3 more. Kindling. 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 He spied a wooden crate half full of curled shavings and split slivers. He dragged it close with his forearm because his fingers still wouldn't work. He shoved the kindling into the belly of the stove like a starving man stuffing food into his mouth. Matches. Where'd they? There, on the table. Little tin box. He staggered to the table, grabbed the tin in both hands, and nearly cried when it slipped from his numb, shaking grip and clattered to the floor, scattering matches. No, he croaked. His voice sounded like someone else's. No, no. He dropped down, face inches from the planks, and nudged a matchstick toward himself with his lips. He trapped it awkwardly between his teeth, then pressed it clumsy against the rough of the crate edge. It didn't strike. He tried again. Sparks. Again. On the 4th drag, the match flared. For a heartbeat, the tiny flame felt hotter than the sun. He moved like a man handling holy relics, cupping that little fire with both frozen hands, protecting it from the draft of the room as if it were life itself, which, just now, it was. He touched the flame to the kindling in the stove. The shavings caught with a hungry whisper. Orange licked into life, then deepened. He fed it, coaxed it, breathed on it, shoulders shaking, teeth chattering, eyes stinging. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, live, live." The fire answered. In less than a minute, the little iron stove began to glow with waking heat. In 5, Caleb felt the first prickling, stabbing burn of blood crawling back into his fingers. He hissed through his teeth, half in pain, half in gratitude. His clothes steamed. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor, then froze in cloudy little skins. He stripped the coat off, fighting stiff cloth, and dropped it not too near the stove. His boots he left on for now. He'd heard stories of men who tugged off their boots too fast in cold like this, and pulled skin with them. He sat with his back against the wall, legs stretched toward the stove, shaking like an animal that had almost been killed and hadn't quite decided if it was still alive. For a while, there was nothing but breath and the soft, steady tick of expanding metal as the stove warmed. Then, slowly, he began to come back. He looked around again. This time, he saw details he'd missed. There were books, 3 of them, stacked neatly beside the cot. Not the kind of dime novels that drifted up from Seattle with lurid covers and ridiculous titles. These were worn, cloth-bound, the corners rounded from use. One lay open, face down, as if someone had set it aside in the middle of reading. There was a mug on the table. The dregs of something dark and long cold sat in the bottom. There was a boot print in the gray ash near the stove that was not his. His heart kicked once, hard. This is someone's place. He had known it already, in a distant way. A shack like this out here didn't build itself. But now, in the returning clarity of warmth and breath, the truth sharpened. This was not an abandoned wreck. This was used. Recently, which meant one of 2 things. Either whoever lived here was out in the storm and would return any minute, or whoever lived here was not coming back. Caleb wet his lips. "Hello?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. "Hello? Anyone here?" The storm moaned outside. No answer. He waited. Still nothing. He pushed himself to his feet and moved through the cabin, forcing his legs to steady. He checked behind the hanging burlap curtain that sectioned off a corner. More crates, a cured pelt hanging from a nail. No person, no body. He let out the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Then he noticed the journal. It lay on the table, under the lantern, half covered by a folded scrap of oilskin. The book was thick, leather-bound, scuffed. A pencil lay across it. Caleb hesitated. The North changes a man's idea of right and wrong. Back in Montana, he would never have dreamed of rifling through another man's private words. In this cold, with his life hanging by threads of luck, the boundary felt thinner. He reached out. His fingers had color again. They still shook, but he could bend them now. He pushed the oilskin aside and opened the book. The first page was filled with tight, practical handwriting. He leaned closer to read. November 3rd, saw smoke upriver. Not my fire. Not any I've seen before. Can't risk approaching in daylight. Meat's running low. We'll trap farther east past the ruined spruce line. Fox sign is plenty there. Caleb frowned. He flipped forward. November 9th. Tracks. 2 men, maybe 3. Heavy prints carrying weight. 1 drags left foot. Not miners. Too light on gear. Hunters or thieves. If they find the sluice, they'll sit on it like buzzards. We'll need to move the rest of the pay dirt before freeze sets in for good. His pulse quickened. Pay dirt, sluice, miners. He turned another page. November 12th. Snow came early and hard. Good cover, bad for hauling. Barrel number 2 buried near Split Rock by the bend. Marked in my head only. No sign of the drifter in 2 days. If he's smart, he went south. If he's stubborn, he's dead by now. Can't risk going after him. Winter's here. Barrel number 2, Split Rock, buried pay dirt. Gold. Caleb swallowed. It felt like swallowing a hot coal. He flipped again, then again, skimming faster, chasing the words with hungry eyes until he reached December 1st. If anyone finds this and I'm gone, listen. The vein is not where they say. The big talk in Dawson about Bonanza Creek. Loud drunk fools and their map selling is a trick. There is color there, sure, but not the kind to last. The real line is farther east, 4 days' walk from here in clear weather, in the cuts between the broken hills where the black spruce grows twisted. The creek with the iron taste, the one that sings. You'll know it. You'll feel it in your teeth. Stop looking where the crowds are looking. Go where it's quiet. Take only what you can carry in one run. Don't tell a soul. Don't trust a partner. Don't light a fire at night if you can help it. Keep moving. Keep breathing. North keeps its gold, and north keeps its dead. If you're not willing to be the first, you'll just end up being the second. Caleb stared at the page. His breath had gone shallow again. He could feel it, right then, in his chest. The way a horse feels water before it smells it. The way a man feels danger before he can name it. Those words weren't just a note. They were a trail, a secret trail, a map written in hunger. He looked up. The shack suddenly felt smaller. The storm still howled outside, ramming at the door, rattling the walls. The fire had warmed the little room to something survivable, and steam still curled from his drying coat. He was alive. He had warmth. He had shelter. He had, for this brief and fragile moment, safety. But he also had something else now. Purpose. Not the soft, hopeful purpose he'd had back in Montana, swearing to his sister that he'd come back with riches and heroism and glory. This was different. This was sharp. This had edges. 4 days east in clear weather. He glanced toward the door. Clear weather? There was nothing clear about the night outside now. But storms ended. Snow stopped. Skies opened. And when they did, a sound cut his thoughts in half. Not the storm, not the stove. A new sound. Close. A crunch of footsteps in the snow just beyond the door. Caleb froze. Every instinct in him leapt awake, the way a deer goes rigid with its head up, nostrils quivering. His heart hammered so hard it hurt. The journal lay open in front of him like a confession. Another step. Slow. Deliberate. Whoever lived here? Or whoever the journal warned about? Caleb's eyes flicked to the rifle hanging on the wall. He didn't think. He moved. He crossed the cabin in 3 silent strides and pulled the rifle down. It was heavier than his father's Winchester, older too, the wood scarred and dark from oil and use, but it felt sound in his hands. He checked the chamber with numb, trained fingers. Loaded. Good. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. For 1 breath, then 2. There was only the storm wind moan and the small, hungry crackle of the stove. Then a rough voice, muffled by the door, called in, "I know you're in there." Caleb said nothing. He lifted the rifle, braced the stock tight against his shoulder like his father had taught him, and aimed at the door. The voice on the other side gave a low, humorless chuckle. "That stove's throwing light through the cracks," the man said. "And I can see your tracks to the door clear as day. So you can stop pretending this place is empty and open up like a neighbor, or I can put a bullet through this plank and we can meet rude." Caleb swallowed. His pulse thudded in his throat. The voice continued, almost pleasant now. "Your call, boy." Caleb drew a slow breath through his nose, steadying the front sight of the rifle. "On 3, he said, his voice steady in a way that surprised him. "You open that door on 3 and step inside slow. Hands where I can see 'em. You try anything else, I shoot. You understand?" There was a pause. Then, to his surprise, the man outside laughed softly. "Oh," he said, "you've got a little iron in you. I like that." Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. "1, he said. There was a scrape of boots against the porch. 2, he said. The latch began to move. He exhaled, aimed, felt everything in him narrow to a single point. 3. The door swung inward. The wind punched in a blast of snow and black night, and with it the shape of a man. Caleb's eyes took him in an instant. Tall, thick through the shoulders, wrapped in furs gone silver with frost. Beard stiff with ice, eyes sharp and pale. A revolver hung low at his hip, but his hands were held out, palms open. And behind him, barely visible in the blowing dark, 2 more shapes. 2 more men. All armed, all watching. "Evening," the first man said easily. "Name's Barlow." He smiled. "I believe," he said, voice smooth as creek ice, "you've got something of mine." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Snow gusted through the open doorway, hissing across the plank floor and melting into dark spots. The fire in the stove snapped and spat. The lantern swung a little, throwing slow, circling light over the room, over the table with the open journal, over the crates, over the rifle braced tight against Caleb's shoulder. Barlow stood just inside the doorway, hands raised, palms out. He was the kind of man you didn't mistake for anything else. Not a miner, not a trapper, not a lost traveler. Men up here wore the North. Frost-burned cheeks, cracked knuckles, eyes that stayed moving, and he had that. But he had something more, a stillness, coiled, like a wolf that wasn't hungry but killed anyway because it enjoyed the way prey ran. The fur around his shoulders was fine, too fine. White wolf, maybe. The revolver at his hip wasn't cheap gear from some dockside trading post. It gleamed. The grips were smooth, well-fed gun. His beard was short and iced at the edges. His cheeks were wind-cut raw. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and they watched Caleb the way a surveyor watches land, measuring it, marking it, already deciding what to take. "Smart boy," Barlow said softly. His voice had warmth in it, but no kindness. "Didn't shoot. Most green ones, they shoot." "I'll still shoot," Caleb said. Barlow's pale eyes flickered in approval. "Even better." The 2 men behind him stepped only 1 pace into the doorway and no farther. That told Caleb something. They weren't cold. They weren't desperate to get near the stove, which meant they were disciplined or scared. Scared of him or scared of Barlow. They wore mismatched furs and oilskins, faces half covered in scarves. Both carried rifles already in their hands, angled low but ready. One of them had a scar that dragged his left eye half shut. The other had no hat, just hair plastered flat with wet snow and a raw red ear that looked half frostbitten. Caleb let his eyes flick back to Barlow, just long enough to show he wasn't rattled. "This is someone's cabin," Caleb said. "Does it belong to you?" Barlow chuckled softly. "Belong," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "That's a southern word." Caleb said nothing. Barlow dipped his chin toward the open book on the table. "You been reading?" Caleb didn't answer. Barlow smiled like he already knew. "Good," he said. "Saves me time." Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle. "Careful," Barlow said mildly. "That trigger's lighter than you think." "I said hands where I can see them," Caleb said. "All of you. Take the gloves off slow. Put the guns on the floor." Scar Eye snorted. "You serious?" Barlow didn't look back. "Do it." Scar Eye hesitated, just a flicker, a twitch, but he did it. He crouched, set his rifle down on the planks, then straightened and lifted his hands. The other man followed, slower. His eyes never left Caleb. Barlow took his time. First he unbuckled the revolver from his hip and lay it gently on the floor. Then he uncurled his gloved fingers and spread his hands wide, like a man showing a card table he isn't cheating. "There," he said. "We're all friends now." "You're standing in the doorway," Caleb said. "Close it." Barlow's eyes warmed. "You thinking ahead," he murmured. "That's good. That's real good. Close it." Barlow nudged the door shut with his boot. The shack sealed again. The wind dropped to a dull roar. Snow no longer blasted the room. The lantern glow steadied. The cabin felt suddenly tighter, closer. More air, less storm, more tension. Caleb didn't lower the rifle. Barlow nodded at the stove. "Mind if I step closer to that?" "Stay there." Barlow lifted an eyebrow. "You plan on keeping 3 men off a stove all night with a borrowed gun and a shaking grip?" "I'm not shaking," Caleb lied. Barlow's smile widened just a notch. "You're damn near purple from the neck down," he said in a reasonable tone. "You've got ice still melting in your collar, and I can hear your teeth click. You jumped ship. I can smell the salt on you, which means the Rosamond didn't make it, which means there's more dead men in the water than live ones on shore tonight, which also means—" He tilted his head, studying Caleb's face. "You're alone." Caleb said nothing. Barlow gave a slow, approving nod. "How old are you?" "Old enough." That earned Caleb a soft laugh from the man with the half-frozen ear. "Listen to this rooster," he muttered. "Still got egg on his beak and he's talking big." Barlow didn't look away from Caleb. "What's your name?" Caleb said. "No." Barlow gave a quiet, delighted sound. "I like him," he told the others. "You can like me from outside," Caleb said. "Storm's not that bad for a tough man like you." Scar-Eye's mouth twitched. Barlow's eyes glimmered. For a long moment he just watched Caleb, measuring more. Then, with deliberate calm, he said, "All right, listen. I'll give you something, and I want you to hear it clean. I don't care about the stove. I don't care about the coat on your back. I don't care what you swam through or who you left drowning. I don't care about your past, your sister, your sob story, your dying pa, or whatever fire sent you north. None of that matters to me. Do you know why?" Caleb said nothing. Barlow's eyes went colder. "Because all that is the first fire," he said. "Men come up here burning with that. It's cute, but it don't last. I'm interested in your second fire." Caleb frowned. Barlow lifted his chin toward the journal. "That one." No one spoke. Caleb could feel his heartbeat in his throat again. Barlow went on, almost gently. "You came off a wreck. You're half dead. You find a cabin with heat and a roof. And the first thing you do, once you get a fire going so you don't turn blue and tip over, isn't pass out, isn't cry, isn't pray. You snoop. You went hunting for information, son. That means you're not a drifter. You're not lost. You're hungry. You're already thinking about tomorrow." His smile sharpened. "That's the second fire." Caleb stayed very still. "So," Barlow said quietly, "I'm going to ask you once, neighbor to neighbor. Did you read where he buried the pay dirt?" Caleb kept the barrel steady on Barlow's chest. "Who is he?" "Don't try clever," Scar-Eye snapped. "You ain't built for it." Barlow didn't break his calm. "The man who lived here," he said. "Old man named Merritt, trapper. Took on some washing work for a few of the boys heading to Dawson. Mended snowshoes, sharpened axes, sold jerky at winter prices. Folks around here liked him. Harmless type." He paused. "Until he wasn't harmless." Caleb said nothing. Barlow continued. "About a month back, Merritt shows up downstream with a pan he accidentally left on the bar at a winter camp. A slow smile cut across his face. Pan had color in it. Real color, not fool's talk, not a few specks for bait. No, this was heavy, enough to make even tired men sit up straight. Scar-Eye licked his bottom lip, remembering. Barlow said, that was the day Merritt stopped being harmless. Caleb understood the rest without needing it told. Barlow leaned a little closer. Not enough to test the barrel of the rifle, just enough to let his voice drop to something dangerous, soft. Merritt wasn't stupid. He knew what gold does to men. He knew what it does to men like me. So one day he's in sight, sitting by the fire, like always, old and friendly. Next day he's gone, packed light, quiet, vanished like fog. Barlow lifted his chin toward the rafters. And we've been looking for this cabin ever since. The room felt smaller. Barlow's eyes flicked down to the open journal, just for a heartbeat. We ain't found it till tonight. So, he said again, voice low and patient, I'm going to ask you one more time, and this time, you're going to answer. Did you read where Merritt buried the pay dirt? Caleb breathed in slow. Breathed out slower. His father had taught him to keep his face still when buyers came to haggle for cattle. If a man sees you wanting, Pa had said, coughing into a bloody rag, he'll buy you as cheap as he can. Caleb kept his face still. No, he said. Barlow watched his eyes while he said it. A beat of silence. 2. Then Barlow smiled. You're lying, he said, pleasant as summer. Scar-Eye laughed once. The half-frozen ear man grinned. Caleb didn't blink. Barlow sighed, almost like a disappointed teacher. I was hoping we'd do this as neighbors, he said. Civil. Share the stove, share the notes, share the night. But you're young. You smell scared, so you're thinking scared. That's normal. I'm not scared, Caleb said. Barlow's smile widened. Now you're lying twice. And he moved. It wasn't big. It wasn't something loud. It was a little thing, casual and almost lazy. Barlow just shifted his weight. But it was toward the side. Caleb's eyes flicked. Without looking, Barlow's left hand darted down and kicked his revolver backward, not toward himself, but back toward the man with the frozen ear. Now, Barlow said, everything happened at once. Frozen Ear dropped and snatched the revolver off the floor. Scar-Eye launched himself forward, shoulder down. Barlow dove sideways. Caleb fired. The rifle's crack in the small cabin was like a hammer to the skull. The lantern jumped. The shot smashed into Scar-Eye's upper arm instead of his chest because of that split-second shift of weight. Scar-Eye screamed, spun, slammed into the table, and the journal skidded across the floor. Barlow was already moving, fast, low, practiced. He came up inside the rifle's reach and drove his fist like an iron knot into Caleb's wrist. Lightning shot up Caleb's arm. The rifle clattered to the floor. Frozen Ear leveled the revolver. Caleb didn't think. He grabbed. His hand closed on the first thing it found, the hot iron stove door. He yanked it open and kicked. Heat and sparks blasted outward in a puff of angry orange. Frozen Ear swore and threw an arm over his face on reflex. The revolver barked, the shot going wild, slamming splinters out of the door frame and blowing a hot groove across Caleb's shoulder. Pain ripped through him. He tasted metal. Barlow's fist came again, this time into Caleb's gut. Air flew out of Caleb in a hard groan. He doubled, saw gray, fought to keep his feet. Barlow grabbed a fistful of Caleb's undershirt and slammed him back against the wall so hard his skull rang. Enough, Barlow snapped. Caleb dragged for air. The room spun. There was firelight and smoke and the stink of scorched fur. Scar-Eye was on the floor clutching his arm and cursing through his teeth. Frozen Ear had his eyes narrowed now, revolver steady, no more flinch in him. The journal lay open near the overturned chair. Barlow pressed one forearm across Caleb's collarbone and throat, pinning him, and leaned in until their faces were inches apart. Up close, Barlow smelled like old leather, cold air, and faint tobacco. "You're smart," Barlow said quietly. "I'm not taking that from you. A dumb boy would have shot blind and got killed for it. You aimed. You made demands. You bluffed. That's all good. That'll keep you alive if you live long enough to use it." Caleb's breath came ragged. "Get off me." Barlow ignored that. His pale eyes were bright and cold as river ice. "Here's what's going to happen," he said softly. "You're going to tell me everything old Merritt wrote, all of it. Where he took the dirt, where he cached it, where he worked, his marks, his trail, his warnings, all of it." Caleb swallowed against the arm on his throat. "And if I don't," he rasped. Barlow smiled without humor. "Then I leave you alive," he said. Caleb blinked. Barlow's smile widened a fraction. "That part confuses people," he murmured. "They think I'm bluffing. But I ain't cruel by nature, son. I don't like wasting bullets, and I don't like breaking bones I might need later. I'll leave you alive. Right here. In this pretty little cabin. With no rifle, no matches, no wood pile. I'll walk out, take what's useful, and I'll nail that door shut from the outside on my way. You won't freeze right away. That's the bad part. You'll sit here and feel the cold sneak in, and you'll hear yourself getting slow, and you'll feel your fingers stop listening, and you'll start talking to people who ain't there. You'll last a while. You'll know it's coming. And when it comes, boy, it ain't quick." His voice stayed calm. Steady, almost kind. "That's what happens if you don't talk to me," Barlow finished softly. "What happens if you do talk? I leave you the stove." The cabin was quiet except for Scar-Eye's ragged breathing and the low, hungry crackles of the fire. Caleb held Barlow's gaze. He thought of his father, coughing blood and still trying to lift fence posts with shaking hands. He thought of June, her cracked red hands in dishwater, looking at him with that hope that hurt. He thought of Montana fading behind him like a dream. He thought of Pike saying, "Some men work for it, some men wait." He thought of the journal and the words that had lit something hot and iron in his chest. The creek with the iron taste, the one that sings. Stop looking where the crowds are looking. Go where it's quiet. And something reckless, something stubborn, something that might someday get him killed, or might someday make him rich enough to buy back every acre his father ever broke with a plow, rose up hard in him. "No," Caleb whispered. Barlow's eyes narrowed. "Think careful." "No," Caleb said again, hoarser but steadier. "You'll take it all. Men like you always take it all. You'll leave me the stove without wood. You'll leave me a chance while you follow his trail and strip it bare. You said you ain't cruel by nature, but you're a liar by trade. So, no, I won't." Frozen Ear gave a low whistle. "Kid's got rocks." Barlow's jaw flexed once, then he smiled. "Not warm, not friendly, not fake, hungry. There he is," he murmured. The arm across Caleb's throat lifted slightly, not enough to free him, but enough to let him draw a full breath. "You think I need every last piece Merritt wrote?" Barlow asked softly. "No. I just need enough to get ahead of the other wolves. I already know half the song. But here's the thing, son. You're new. You ain't on anybody's maps yet. That's useful. And you're stubborn. That's dangerous, but it's useful too. so I'll make you a better offer." Caleb's heart hammered. Barlow leaned in close enough for Caleb to see the tiny white scar that nicked the man's bottom lip. "You're coming with us." Caleb stared. "No," he said. "Yes," Barlow said calmly. "You'll walk, right now. We'll take you upriver to camp, get you warm, get you fed. You tell me what Merritt wrote while we're moving, just enough to keep you valuable. And in return, you get to not die in this shack tonight. Seems fair to me." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes," Barlow repeated, patient as a parent correcting a child. "You are, because if you don't, I go back to my first plan with the door, and you get to find out how long a man can think before his thinking stops working." Caleb breathed hard through his nose. He could smell the iron in his own blood. Barlow's voice dropped to a murmur. "And I'll tell you why else you're coming with me," he said. "It's because you're not done yet." Caleb swallowed. "What?" Barlow's pale eyes glinted. "You think I don't see it? I've been north 5 winters, kid. I've watched men drown in 3 inches of slush. I've watched 'em stab each other over a handful of black sand. I've watched 'em walk into the white because their sweetheart back in Omaha married another man, and they didn't see the point anymore. I can smell when somebody's already dead inside." His voice lowered. "You ain't. You've still got that second fire going. You're not done yet. And a man who ain't done yet, that's a man worth keeping on a rope, at least until I know if he's going to be a problem." Caleb felt a cold different from the winter one slide down his spine. Barlow smiled, slow and satisfied, like he'd just bought a horse for half its worth. "So," he said, almost cheerful again, "that's settled. It's not—" Barlow jerked his chin. "Rope him." Frozen Ear holstered the revolver, stepped forward, and in 2 fast-practiced motions had Caleb's wrists yanked down and looped with a length of rawhide from his belt. Caleb twisted, tried to wrench free, but Barlow slammed him back against the wall again, pinning him hard enough that his vision flashed white. "Don't," Barlow said quietly. Caleb's breath came short and angry. Scar Eye groaned from the floor. "He broke my damn arm," he snarled through clenched teeth. "Shut it," Barlow said without looking. "You'll live. He shot me." "Should have moved faster," Barlow said. Scar Eye spat blood and glared at Caleb with a kind of hatred that promised a future. Barlow finally eased back and let Caleb straighten. The rawhide bit at Caleb's wrists. His shoulder throbbed where the wild shot had burned a bloody groove. His ribs ached. His throat burned where Barlow's forearm had pressed. He was still standing. He was still breathing. Good. Barlow bent and scooped up the journal in one smooth motion. He didn't skim it. He didn't flip through it. He tucked it inside his coat like it was a holy book. Then he reached out and, with almost ridiculous politeness, picked Caleb's soaked coat off the floor and tossed it to him. "Put that on," Barlow said. "You'll freeze outside like that." Caleb stared at him. Barlow chuckled. "You dying of the cold now helps nobody. Put it on." Caleb shrugged into the coat with bound hands and said nothing. Barlow nodded to Frozen Ear. "Take the stove. Tip the live coals. Don't burn the place down. Just kill the heat." Frozen Ear gave a satisfied grin and moved to the stove. Barlow leaned toward Caleb one last time. "You run," he said softly. "I don't shoot you. I don't waste a bullet. I let Reese there." He jerked his head at Scar Eye. "Catch you. You don't want Reese to catch you. Trust me on that." Scar Eye bared his teeth like a dog. Caleb held Barlow's eyes. "If you kill the fire," he said quietly, "and you take me, and you walk out that door, This cabin goes cold. The man who lived here, Merritt, maybe he comes back and finds nothing. You leave him to freeze." Barlow shrugged. "Merritt ain't coming back," he said simply. "How do you know?" Caleb demanded. Barlow's pale eyes stayed flat. "Because I put a bullet in him 2 nights ago." The silence in Caleb's head was louder than the storm. Barlow smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. "He ran," he said conversationally. "He was fast for an old man. I'll give him that. Fast and clever. Knew the brush, knew where to step. We tracked him a day and a half before he tried to cross a bend in thin ice. He went through. He came up. Reese put one in him when he came up. He shrugged again. He sank. We didn't fish him out. Too cold to waste the time. So no, son, Merritt ain't coming back." Caleb felt something in his chest go hot. Hotter than the stove, hotter than anger. It was clean and sharp and bright. He nodded once. "All right," he said quietly. "Then I'll kill you for him." Frozen Ear let out a barking laugh. Scar Eye snarled. "I'm taking his tongue." Barlow just looked at Caleb for a long, still moment. Then he smiled slow. "See, boys," he murmured. "Second fire." They pushed out into the storm in a tight knot. The world outside hit like a wall. Wind howled off the river, clawing at faces, stealing breath. Snow slashed sideways in ragged sheets, filling the air with 1,000 white knives. The dark was not truly dark. The sky had that storm glow, that strange iron gray that comes in deep winter when snow turns the night into a dim, restless twilight. But it was full of movement, confusion, danger. Caleb stumbled once, and Scar Eye shoved him hard between the shoulders. "Walk!" Reese snapped. Caleb bit back a curse and kept his feet under him. The rawhide on his wrists pulled. The cut on his shoulder had gone from burning to a hard, throbbing ache. Barlow moved like a man who knew every inch of this ground, even in a storm. He went first, shoulders hunched, head low, scanning the dark. Frozen Ear walked just behind and to the side of Caleb, revolver in his gloved hand, easy as a man walking a dog on a rope. Scar Eye, cradling his shot arm, lurked behind, close enough that Caleb could feel the heat of his anger even in the freezing air. They moved through trees, then out, then down a shallow slope where the wind hit harder. The crunch underfoot changed. No longer snow over dirt, harder, smoother, river ice. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. The wind here screamed unbroken. Stinging snow lashed his face. He squinted against it, teeth clenched, and kept moving because stopping meant going down, and going down meant Reese on him, and Reese on him meant something worse than the cold. They were halfway across the frozen bend when Barlow lifted one hand. "Hold," he barked. Everyone froze. Caleb felt it. The ice under his boots gave a tired groan. Not a crack, not yet. Just that low, deep complaint of something strained close to breaking. Barlow crouched, a gloved hand pressed to the surface. He cocked his head, listening. "Fast," he said. "Line, single file. Keep your feet light. You go where I go, you don't go where I don't. Move." They moved. The wind tore at them. Caleb felt the ice flex and moan under his weight. He felt the river alive beneath them, cold and hungry. He swallowed hard and breathed through his nose, focusing not on the fear or the cold or the ache in his wrists, but on Barlow's boots in front of him. Step wary steps. Don't die here, not like Merritt. And then, just for an instant, the storm broke. Snow thinned, the wind lulled, the world opened. Caleb saw the river's bend below them, a dark sweep lined by black spruces glazed with ice. He saw a stand of trees ahead, dense and jagged, where the bank rose and cut the wind. He saw, God, he saw it, a flicker of orange through those trees. Camp. Barlow had a camp up ahead. Firelight. Shelter. More of his men, maybe. Guns. Ropes. A place to disappear in the dark. Caleb's chest tightened. If they got him to that camp, he knew, bone deep knew, he was done. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but done. Barlow would squeeze him for Merritt's map, for details, for scraps, and then a bullet maybe, a throat cut and a shallow snow grave, or worse, a rope around his neck like a leash used until he wasn't useful. No, no, no. In that clean, brief, open moment before the storm closed again, Caleb saw something else. To the left, downstream, a cluster of fallen spruce half buried in snow. The trunks had come down in some old wind throw, their roots yanked up and frozen into a jagged wall. Between two of those fallen giants, a black gap, maybe 2 feet wide, maybe 3, a hollow, dark, a cut in the snow that dropped fast, then vanished. Animal run, shelter pocket, blind curve, cover. An idea hit him so fast it felt like instinct, not thought. He turned his ankle. He cried out and dropped to one knee, letting all his weight slam down on the ice. Crack. The sound ripped through the night, sharp as rifle fire. "Move!" Barlow roared. Reese swore. Frozen ear spun. The line broke. Barlow lunged forward, instinctively getting off the weakening patch. Frozen ear stumbled sideways, attention torn between Caleb and his own survival. Reese lurched back, cursing, boots skidding. Caleb threw himself left. He didn't try to run upright. He dove. His shoulder hit the ice, and pain flared white-hot through him, but momentum took him sliding across the slick surface like a stone thrown low over a pond. He twisted his body in mid-slide, angling toward that black gap between the fallen spruce roots. "Grab him!" Reese bellowed. The revolver barked. Snow exploded inches from Caleb's face, spitting ice into his eyes. He slid, and then the ice under him dropped out and he fell. The world turned into white and dark and pain. He tumbled down a short, steep cut of packed snow and broken branches. Roots clawed at his coat. Something tore at his back. He smashed shoulder first into a buried log, flipped, and landed hard in a pocket of cold air. Then silence. Not real silence. He could still hear the storm above, muffled now. He could hear his own lungs dragging for air. He could hear his heart a hammer in his chest, but up there, above the bank, Barlow shouted orders, and those orders sounded distant, wrong-sided, blind. "Downstream!" Barlow's voice, sharp. "Watch the ice! Reese, loop right! Hawk, with me! He's in the brush, go!" Caleb lay still. He forced himself not to cough, not to gasp loud, not to move. He was wedged in a narrow pocket under the tangle of fallen spruce. Snow had drifted over the whole mess, making a false, smooth bank. The gap he'd seen was a break where wind had scooped the snow thin. Down here, the air was dead cold, but out of the wind. He could taste damp spruce, old sap, ice. He listened. Boots thundered overhead. Snow thumped as men slid down the bank farther downstream, cursing. Branches snapped. Voices overlapped. He went under. "He's bleeding." I saw red on the ice. "Shut up and look, Hawk." Caleb pressed himself flatter under the curve of a root and made himself small. He twisted his wrists against the raw hide. The rope bit his skin. Warm wet slid over his fingers. Blood? He welcomed it. Warm meant alive. Above him, boots pounded past. Close. So close he could hear the leather creak. So close he could hear Reese's ragged, angry breathing and the wet sound of his injured arm. So close he could hear Barlow's voice, still calm, still in control, still patient, cutting through the storm. He didn't go far. He's green, he's hurt, he's tied. He's not outpacing you. Spread a sweep 30 yards wide. Find me blood. Find me drag. When you find him, nobody shoots. You hear me? Nobody shoots. He's mine. Caleb didn't breathe for 5 full heartbeats. Then the footsteps moved on. The voices bled into the storm, and the storm swallowed them. For several long seconds, all Caleb could hear was wind, like a living thing clawing at the world above the root tangle. Slowly, very slowly, he let himself breathe. His whole body ached, his shoulder screamed, his wrists burned, his cheek felt raw where ice had scraped it. His coat had torn along the back seam. He could feel wet spreading between his shoulder blades from the graze shot, but the bleeding there felt sluggish, not pumping. Good. He could work with sluggish. He flexed his fingers. They were numb, but they answered. Good. He twisted his wrists again, feeling the rawhide. It was cinched tight, but rawhide is leather, and leather hates wet and hates cold. If he could worry it against something sharp, he lifted his hands, inch by inch, feeling out the pocket around him with his fingertips. Snow, snow, ice, root, bark, rough bark. He pressed the rawhide against a shard of frozen, splintered root and started sawing. The first drag sent fire through his skin. He clenched his jaw and kept going. Slow, quiet, steady. Above him, distant now, he could still faintly hear Barlow's voice moving through the storm, calm as ever. Check every hollow. He's worth more than a poke of dust, boys. He's worth time. Caleb gritted his teeth and kept working the rawhide. Saw, saw, saw. He thought of Merritt, old and fast, slipping across thin ice with men like wolves at his heels. He thought of the bullet in Merritt's back. He thought of that patient voice saying, "I leave you alive," like a gift. He sawed harder. The rawhide cut into his wrists. He felt skin tear. He felt warm wet on cold leather. He kept going. And then, sudden, blessed, shocking, the rope gave. It didn't snap clean, but it loosened, and with a hard jerk he tore his hands free. Pain flared through his wrists, and he nearly let out a gasp of relief. He caught it, biting down on his own tongue. He sucked a breath, quiet through his nose. Then he moved. Slow as a fox in a snare, he rolled to his stomach and began to crawl deeper into the fallen spruce tangle, away from the hole he'd slid through, away from the tracks he'd left on the ice. It wasn't a tunnel, not even close. It was a mess of half-frozen branches, jagged roots, air pockets, old snow. He had to push with his elbows and knees, dragging his body an inch at a time, feeling bark scrape his coat and splinters jab through the fabric. Every shove made his shoulder throb. Every wiggle sent little showers of powdery snow down his neck. But he moved. Above him the storm howled. Voices grew fainter, then gone. He pushed until he couldn't hear them at all. Only then, when silence pressed in and the wind outside dulled to a low, constant roar, did he let himself stop. He lay in the dark, under ice and roots and blown-down spruce, chest heaving, every muscle trembling from cold and shock and adrenaline. So he was alone. Alone in the Alaskan night. Alone, hunted, but alive. He let out a slow, shaking breath and felt laughter claw at his throat. Not happy laughter, not sane laughter, just that wild edge that lives right next to terror. It didn't come out. He swallowed it. Instead, he whispered into the dark, "I'm not done yet." Caleb didn't sleep. Sleep was death here. He lay in that cramped hollow, forcing his body to curl small to hold what heat he had left. He pressed his bleeding shoulder against packed snow until the throbbing steadied and went numb. He held his torn wrists against his chest. He tucked his face into the inside fold of his damp coat and let his own breath warm the air he was inhaling. Above him, hours passed in storm noise. He listened. Sometimes he thought he heard voices again, and his heart would kick hard, but they always blew past, or maybe they were only wind. Once he heard something else, a long, low, ululating cry in the distance, and his blood went cold in a new way. Wolves. Real wolves, not the men kind. Good, he told himself through clenched teeth. Good, let the night be full of teeth. Let Barlow feel eyes watching him from the tree line. Let him wonder which tracks are mine and which are not. The cold gnawed at him. It didn't hit fast like the freezing water had. This was slower, meaner. It crept in through the seams of his coat and sat on his bones and whispered, "Sleep. Just a minute. You earned it. Sleep." He clenched his jaw and dug his fingernails into his own palms until the flare of pain cleared his head. "Not yet," he breathed. And in that frozen, dark, under-torn roots and drifted snow, with blood stiffening on his shoulder, and his wrists raw and burning, and his breath steaming in the little pocket of air he'd stolen from the night, Caleb Morgan made himself a promise. Not a soft promise, not a hopeful one, not the kind you make over a sister's hair ribbon and a kitchen table, and a goodbye kiss. A hard promise. A promise edged with iron and ice. He whispered it to the north like a vow. "I'll live," he said softly, his lips numb, his teeth chattering. "I'll live, and I'll learn this land, and I'll take what merit found. I'll find that creek that sings. I'll pull gold from its throat. And when I see you again, Barlow," his breath shook, "I'll put you in the ground." Dawn did not arrive in any way that felt like morning. The storm finally blew itself thin sometime in what his body guessed might have been near sunrise. The howl of the wind softened to a low hiss. The air in his hiding place lightened from pitch black to a dim iron gray. Snow stopped clawing and began to drift soft again. Caleb waited longer, just to be sure, when the cold, clawing sleep voice started sounding like reason. "You can't stay here. You'll die anyway. Might as well move." He knew it was time. He wriggled backward, slow and deliberate, feeling for each little pocket of space. His joints cracked. His muscles screamed. At one point, a branch snagged in the torn seam of his coat, and he had to bite down on his own wrist to keep from crying out as he forced himself free. Finally, his boots found open air. He slid out from under the blown-down spruce like a fox creeping from a snare, shoulders hunched, body low. What waited for him was a white world. Snow lay in smooth drifts, unbroken in most places except where the storm had carved sharp ridges and curled waves. The river bend was a sheet of dull gray ice, dusted with white. The trees on either bank stood black and skeletal, their branches rimed in frost. No men, no smoke, no Barlow. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then his eyes dropped to the ice. There were tracks. A dozen boot prints churned the surface near where he'd crashed through, deep, sharp-edged in the cold. They ran in crazy loops and hard lines back and forth, zigzagging across the bend and up the banks. Here and there he saw splashes of dark. His blood, frozen now into rusty black stains. And then, farther down, past the torn-up chaos of pursuit, the tracks gathered. He saw where they'd regrouped. He saw where they'd headed. Upriver, toward that stand of trees where he'd seen the orange flicker through the storm, toward their camp. They were gone. For now. Caleb swallowed. His face burned with cold. His hands ached. His shoulder had gone from numb to hot, and back to numb again. Every breath cut. He had no rifle, no rope, no food, no fire, and no shelter he could count on using again. If he went back to Merritt's cabin, and Barlow doubled back, and a man like Barlow would double back, then Caleb would be walking into his own grave. He stood alone, in country he didn't know, with men who wanted him alive for now, and dead later less than a day ahead of him. He could go south, back toward the water, back toward... what? Wrecked ship, dead men, open coast, nothing. He could go upriver, toward Barlow, toward the men with guns and food and fire and purpose, and a leader who had already told him, smiling, "You're mine." Or... Caleb lifted his eyes and looked east, past the river bend, past the black line of spruce, past the low ridge iced over with pale morning light, the land rolled up into broken hills. Beyond those hills the sky was a deeper gray, almost blue. 4 days' walk in clear weather, Merritt had written. Between the broken hills, where the black spruce grows twisted. The creek with the iron taste, the one that sings. Caleb licked his cracked lips. The storm had scrubbed most tracks from the higher ground. Out there, nobody had gone yet. No line of boot prints cut that way. No trail marked. That wasn't where men like Barlow went first. Stop looking where the crowds are looking. Go where it's quiet. A slow, painful smile pulled at Caleb's mouth. "All right," he whispered to the frozen morning. His voice was raw and harsh and shaking, but steady beneath it. "Let's see if you sing." He hitched his torn coat tighter around his shoulders, clenched his jaw against the cold, and started walking east, alone. Behind him, on the river ice, the wind picked up and began to blow snow over the churned mess of boot prints. Soft, steady, patient, erasing the signs that anyone had ever been there at all. Far ahead, through the trees and over the first low ridge, something waited. Gold, or death, or both. And behind him, somewhere upriver in a camp he could not see, a man with pale gray eyes and a hungry smile warmed his hands over a stolen fire and said to his men, "Find him." The first hour east was not walking, it was bleeding and not falling. Caleb's boots punched through wind-crusted snow with every other step, and every time his right foot went down he felt a warning in the ice under the surface, like a voice saying, "Too far, too slow, too loud." His left shoulder had gone from numb to a deep, ugly ache that pulsed in slow waves. His wrists burned raw where the rawhide had torn skin. His face stung, then stopped stinging, and that scared him more than the pain had. Pain meant alive. No pain meant the cold was starting to win. He pulled the coat tighter. The tear in the back let wind lick down his spine. Every gust felt like a wet finger on bone. He did not look back, not once. He didn't look toward the river bend, where Barlow and his men would be warming up beside a fire that wasn't theirs, under a tarp that wasn't theirs, laughing about the boy who thought he could run. He didn't look toward the coast, where the Rosamond had gone down into black water full of ice and dead men's hands. He looked only toward the low ridge ahead. The land there rose in a slow, rolling swell, like the back of a sleeping animal. Spruce, stunted and dark, clung to the slope. Between their trunks, snow had drifted deep, smooth, unbroken. Beyond the ridge, the hills leaned against one another in broken shapes. Farther still, the sky went from dirty storm gray to a blue so pale it was almost white. 4 days east in clear weather. He wasn't walking in clear weather. He wasn't carrying food. He wasn't following a trail. He was half frozen and light-headed from blood loss and running mostly on stubbornness and anger. But he had direction. For now, that was enough. He stopped at the base of the ridge and leaned one palm against the rough bark of a spruce. His breath came in white bursts. Each exhale felt like it took something out of him. He needed to think. He couldn't just keep moving blind. Men died that way in stories Pike told. They wander because they're scared to stop, Pike had said in the hold of the Rosamond, when everyone thought the danger was still just wind and water. And then they lay down in the middle of nowhere and never stand up again. The ground swallows 'em, and the ravens do the rest. Caleb closed his eyes. You don't lay down, he told himself. You settle. 2 different things. Settle, he whispered. His voice cracked. He opened his eyes and looked around, not as a boy stumbling, but as a man about to work. First job, stop the bleeding. He unclasped the coat. Cold immediately knifed his ribs, but he ignored it. He worked his left arm out of the sleeve, with his teeth clenched and hissed. When the fabric dragged across the groove the bullet had carved, he couldn't see the wound well. It was high along his shoulder and under the back edge of his collarbone, but when he probed with numb fingers, he felt torn skin, swelling, sticky, half-frozen blood. The shot hadn't gone through. It had kissed him, opened him, but not buried deep. That was luck. He could not count on luck repeating. He needed to keep it closed, keep it clean, keep it from freezing solid and tearing wider every time he moved. He dug into the lining of his coat with shaking fingers until he found what he was looking for. The inside seam doubled. He hooked 2 fingers in and ripped. The stitch fought him, then popped. He tore a strip loose, then another. He wrapped those strips tight under his arm and across his chest, pulling until his eyes watered, tying the ends with trembling hands and his teeth. Crude, but pressure. Good. Second job, hands. His wrists were raw and bleeding in lines where the raw hide had bitten in, and the cold was chewing at those cuts like mice on grain. Infection would love that later. Right now, heat would love it more. He pulled his sleeves back down and shoved his hands deep under his armpits, trapping them for a slow count of 20. His fingers screamed, then prickled, then throbbed, then began to obey again. Good. Third job, shelter. He looked up the ridge. If he went over now, he'd lose what little he had left in his legs. He could feel it, the wobble at the knees, the lead weight in the thighs. He'd face open ground on the other side, and the wind would hit him clean with nothing to break it. He'd burn through everything in minutes. No. He needed a pocket, somewhere in this ridge. Out of the wind, out of sight, something with a back to it so nothing could come up behind him quiet. He scanned. At first, all he saw was drifted white and black trunks. Then his eyes adjusted to the language of winter. There, not far up the slope, tucked behind a thicket of young spruce, snow sloped inward. The drift didn't pile high and smooth. It dipped low and dark in the center. Not a hole, not open, but a softened sag, round at the edges. Caleb squinted. His breath fogged. could be just a wind hollow. Could be better. He forced his legs to move. The climb wasn't steep, but his muscles argued like old men being dragged from a chair. He planted each step, drove upward, grabbed at branches when his boots slipped. By the time he reached the sag, his lungs burned and his legs trembled so hard he had to plant one palm on the trunk beside him to keep from sinking to both knees. Up close, the sag was exactly what he'd hoped. Not just drift, but drift over structure. Deadfall. 2, maybe 3 old trunks had come down seasons ago and half buried themselves in snow. Their branches had knitted together and caught more snow, more needles, more winter. The result was a shallow cavity beneath, low, narrow, but real. Something like a shallow den. Shelter. Thank God. He scraped at the edge of the drift with his bare hands until his fingers went bright red and sharp pain flashed in his knuckles. He clawed out enough snow to widen the low gap, then slid in on his belly like an animal. Inside, calm. The wind dropped to a muffled hum. The biting cold eased half a notch. It was still freezing. His breath still steamed in pale gusts and vanished in the air. But it wasn't that cutting, stealing cold that took your thoughts away. It was the kind of cold you could plan in. He could sit up in here, barely. The roof pressed low. Snow and interlocked branches brushed his hat. The ground was hard and icy, but not sheer ice. There was old packed snow and a layer of shed needles, which meant insulation. He exhaled once, shaky. Good, he whispered to no one. Now he could think. Now he could work. Now, instead of moving and dying, he could stay still and live. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapped his arms around them, and bowed his head over them, letting his body curl tight to hold in whatever warmth he had left. He needed fire. That truth sat in his mind like a nail. A man can live without food for days. A man can live without sleep for a while longer. A man cannot live long without heat in this country. He'd seen it already. He'd felt how fast the cold hunted. But fire meant smoke. Smoke meant a trail. Barlow was out there with at least 2 men, maybe more, back at his camp, and he'd made it very clear that he wasn't done hunting. Fire would be a beacon. Stay cold and live quiet, or burn and risk being found. He closed his eyes. His body said burn. His mind said quiet. He leaned his forehead against his knees and let those 2 hungers fight in him for a long, slow count. Then he made a choice. Quiet, he breathed. It felt like tearing off a warm blanket. But it was right. He had one advantage, and only one. Barlow didn't know where he'd gone. That would not last. If he bought himself even an hour or 2 more with that ignorance, it might be the difference between walking and crawling. So, no fire. Not yet, but he could cheat. He unbuttoned his coat down the front and pulled it open just enough to work his hands under his shirt. He pressed his palms, stinging, swollen, against his bare belly and ribs, then shoved his numb fingers into his armpits again, this time skin on skin. He leaned forward and let his own breath billow under his coat like a blanket. It was miserable. It was also heat. He focused on staying awake. The temptation to drift hit him hard and sudden, like a soft hand on the back of his neck. Just close your eyes for a second. Just let go. Just fall. He bared his teeth. No, he whispered. His voice sounded soft and rough in the small space, like a secret he was telling the snow. No, not yet. He dug his nails into his thigh until the flash of pain sharpened his eyes. Not yet, he repeated. Time lost edges. Minutes stretched long and thin. His breath made small white ghosts in front of his face that rose and vanished. His heartbeat thumped against his ribs like a hammer wrapped in wool. His shoulder settled into a kind of dull, constant pulse. He could almost forget if he didn't move too much. He listened. At first, all he heard was wind humming through spruce. Then, slowly, as he let his breath quiet and his own shivers slow, the land began to speak to him in other sounds, snow shifting, soft and granular, the tiny scratch-scratch of something digging under the drift not far from his boot. Vole, maybe, or snowshoe hair. Farther off, a hollow, distant crack as some loaded branch finally surrendered under ice and snapped free. Even farther, a long, mournful howl that rolled low across the ridge like smoke. Wolves. He felt the hair on the back of his neck lift. In Montana, wolves were stories told over coffee and fence wire. "You hear 'em last night up by the cut bank?" "Yeah, they took 2 lambs off McCarthy." "You shoot one yet?" "Hell if I see one close enough." "You talked about them like nuisances or myth." Here, that sound meant something different. It felt older, hungrier. He couldn't outfight a wolf pack, not like this. He had no rifle, no fire, barely a knife at his belt. No, wait. He patted his belt. Nothing. His knife had gone with Pike's rope and Merritt's cabin and Barlow's hands. He had nothing but his coat, his stubbornness, and the splinters stuck in his skin. "Fine," he muttered to himself under his breath. "Fine. Come on, then." But the wolves didn't come. The howl drifted, shifted, faded. He kept listening. After a while, it might have been an hour, it might have been 3. The shaking in his muscles eased from violent to fine. His jaw stopped chattering. His thoughts stopped slipping like boots on ice. He could think again. Good. Now he had a problem to solve. He could not stay here once the light failed. That he knew sure. Night cold was different. Night cold could break you in an hour. He needed a better shelter, and he needed it before the sun slid off the white and the blue went black. And if Barlow was smart, and Barlow was very, very smart, he'd use daylight to search, not night. Men don't track at night unless they have to. Night evens things. Night gives shadows teeth. That meant Caleb had maybe a slice of afternoon to move. He forced himself to uncurl. Every joint in his body protested. His shoulder hammered. His wrists burned where the rawhide had chewed them bloody. His back ached from the cold ground. "Up," he whispered to himself. "Up, up." He slid out of the drift den on his belly, pushing with his elbows, boots kicking against packed snow. The breath of open air hit him in a slap of cold that stole his first inhale and made his eyes tear. But after the pocket's stale chill, it felt almost clean. The world outside had changed. The sky had cleared, not fully. Thin bands of cloud still hung low to the west, but above him, pale, washed-out winter light poured over the ridge. The sun here never rose high this time of year, just hovered low like a tired lantern. But even that was something. The snow glittered hard and bright in a way it hadn't under the storm. He could see farther now. Beyond the ridge, the land did exactly what Merritt had written. It broke. Not mountains, not yet. But the smooth, long roll of ground he'd known in Montana was gone. Instead, there were ragged humps of rock and old earth shoved up crooked, like great shoulders half buried under white. Spruce trees grew there, but strange. Short, twisted, their tops bent and hooked like crooked fingers. Wind tortured, dark against the snow, the broken hills. His heart kicked. He licked his cracked lips. They tasted like salt and iron. "That way," he whispered. And then he saw something else. At the base of the next swell of ground, half covered in snow and shadow, something straight and man-made stuck out of the drift. A cut log. No, not just a log. A short length of timber, not fallen but placed once long ago, and now half collapsed. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Structure. Not a cabin. Too small. But not nothing. He crouched low and moved. He didn't walk in a straight line. He forced himself into a broken path. A few steps, stop, listen. A few more, change direction. Cut his own trail in ways that would make sense to him later when he looked back, but not to someone coming after him in a hurry. He wasn't good at it yet, but he'd watched Pike walk that way in Skagway alleys, loose and casual, like he was just wandering. And Pike hadn't done anything by accident. He reached the shape after maybe 2 minutes. It felt longer because his legs hated him. Up close, it wasn't a cabin. It was older, lower, a trapline cache. He'd seen drawings of them in old magazines, little raised platforms made by trappers to keep meat or pelts out of reach of wolves and wolverine. You'd lash a simple frame between 2 trees and lay logs across it. This one had collapsed on one side, so one end sat up knee-high on a half-buried stump, while the other end lay in the snow. His chest tightened. If there was a cache, there might still be. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the drift around the lower end, heart pounding hot and hard in his throat. Snow burned his fingers. Ice stabbed his nail beds. He didn't care. He scraped until his knuckles bled through cracked skin, and the ache in his hands turned sharp, and then he hit something solid under the hard crust. Not wood, not ice. Canvas. His breath hitched. He scooped with both hands, pushing snow back, and exposed the corner of a small oilskin-wrapped bundle, half frozen to the ground. "Come on," he whispered. He dug his numb fingers under the edge and pulled. The bundle didn't move. He braced his knees and yanked harder. His wounded shoulder screamed, and his vision went white for a heartbeat. But the bundle jerked loose with a ripping sound and rolled into the clean air in a little spray of frost. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he grabbed it and dragged it back toward the shelter of the fallen spruce where the wind cut less. He dropped to his knees in a patch of dappled shade and laid the oilskin on his thighs. His hands shook. "Easy," he told them. "Easy." He worked the stiff, frozen lashing loose with his teeth, and what little feeling remained in his fingers. The knot finally gave. He peeled the oilskin back. For a moment, his vision blurred. Food. Dried strips of meat gone almost black with cold and age. A small canvas pouch, stiff with grease. 2 hard biscuits, white with frost. And his breath caught. A squat tin with a cork stopper. He pulled the tin free, worked the cork with his teeth, and nearly sagged in relief at the sharp burn of what hit his nose. Whiskey. It wasn't much. A swallow or 2, maybe 3, but the smell alone felt like a hand on his back, pushing him upright. "Thank you," he whispered to whoever had stashed this here, whether they were still alive in these hills or feeding the snow now. He didn't let himself tear into it like an animal. He forced himself to be smart. First, the meat. He tore off a strip and put it in his mouth. His jaw almost locked from the effort of chewing. The meat was tough, salted near to leather and frozen so hard it felt like biting rope. He worked it anyway, eyes closed. After a few seconds, his mouth flooded with salt and animal fat and smoke. He almost groaned. Heat slid into him from the inside. Not much, but enough. He ate slow. 2 mouthfuls, maybe 3. He wanted to eat it all, to cram every strip into his mouth until his stomach stopped clawing at itself, but he stopped. He wrapped the rest tight again, tucked it back in the oilskin. Ration. Ration or die later. He lifted the tin and let one small mouthful of whiskey sit on his tongue before he swallowed. Fire bloomed down his throat and into his chest. His eyes watered. He coughed once, sharp, then clamped his jaw to smother the sound. The burn spread low. His fingers tingled with it. He corked the tin again. He could feel the want pulling at him. Another swallow, just one, just enough to make the ache in his shoulder slip to the edges. But want wasn't the boss anymore. Survival was. He shoved the tin deep under his coat, against his belt line. He sat there a moment, head bowed, breathing slow. He could feel his pulse in his wrists, in the raw cuts, heavy and alive. He could feel his shoulder wound seeping warm, and then cooling against the cloth strips he'd tied. He could feel something else, too. Something that had been only a thin line in his chest since the moment he'd jumped off the Rosamond and had burned hot in Merritt's cabin, and then nearly guttered out under the fallen spruce. It flared now. Purpose. You're not just surviving, he told himself. You're moving toward something. You're not lost. You're following a trail. You're not running from Barlow. You're running toward the creek that sings. He let that sink in until it filled him like a lantern fills a dark room. Then he stood. Move, he whispered. He moved different after that. Not faster. He couldn't afford faster, but truer. He stopped wasting steps. He stopped stumbling just to stumble. Every stride had a reason. He aimed not for farther, but for better ground. He skirted open, low spots where the snow piled waist deep in hidden basins that would swallow him to the hips and drain his strength. Instead, he hugged the ragged lines of spruce and alder, where the wind had blown the snow thinner, and he could walk on a hard crust if he moved careful and flat-footed. He started reading the land the way Merritt had written it, between the broken hills, where the black spruce grows twisted. Here, the spruce really did twist. Not tall, proud evergreens like in picture postcards. These were short and old and bent, branches hooked and gnarled like they'd spent their whole lives fighting the wind and losing, but refusing to lie flat. Their bark was darker than home spruce, almost sooty. He looked for them. When he saw a stand of straight, healthy-looking pine, he turned away. When he saw those stunted, stubborn, black twist spruce, he went toward them. And slowly the world changed again. The air felt different, colder somehow, but also heavier, darker. Not darker like night is coming, darker like the light itself was different, like it bent strange between the hills. The ground under his boots took on a faint crunch he didn't recognize. Not just ice, not just snow. Something granular, metallic, like walking over broken glass mixed with sand. He frowned and scraped his boot sideways. Under the thin crust of snow, the ground wasn't pale or brown. It was stained. Dark streaks of red-brown ran through the churned-up patches where his boot had dragged. Not rust, not earth, iron. His pulse jumped. The creek with the iron taste. He lifted his head and listened. At first he heard nothing but his own breathing and the groan of wind in the crooked spruce. Then, faint, so faint he almost missed it, he heard it. Not the rush of a wide river, not the trickle of melt, a hum. A low, steady hum, like a wire pulled tight in the air. he turned toward it. The sound wasn't loud, but it was constant. It vibrated in his jaw more than his ears. He moved toward it the way a thirsty man follows the smell of water. He crested a low fold of ground, dropped down the other side, pushed through a clutch of spruce bent low with ice, and there it was, the creek. It wasn't much to look at. No wide, glittering band, no raging current tearing through ice. It was narrow, hardly wider than a man's stride, and half-covered. Snow and ice had settled over most of it, leaving only slits and ribs of running black water showing here and there. The edges were choked with frozen moss and roots. The banks were a mess of frozen, red-stained gravel. But it moved. Even in this cold, it moved. And as it ran under and through the ice crust, it made that sound. A low, steady hum, like a dull blade running along a whetstone. A song. The creek that sings. Caleb felt something in his chest go tight. He stumbled the last few steps and dropped to his knees on the bank. His legs didn't want to hold him anymore. He didn't ask them to. He leaned over the narrow ribbon of open water and dipped his gloved fingers into it. The water bit. It burned with cold, so sharp it felt hot. He lifted his fingers to his mouth and tasted metal, iron, like licking blood. He let out a shaky breath. Then, with hands that would not stop trembling, he scooped a little of the red-streaked gravel from the shallow edge where the current had cut under the ice and brought it up into the pale light. It just looked like dirt, dark, heavy, wet. He almost laughed. Then he remembered Pike's voice in the hold of the Rosamond telling some loud talker, "You don't just look, you wash. That's how you tell if you're lying to yourself." Wash. Caleb had no pan, but he had hands. He crouched at the bank, elbows braced on his knees so he wouldn't topple face first into the singing water, and slowly, carefully, he let that handful of gravel swirl in a little pool in his palm. The cold was a knife. His fingers screamed. He ignored it. The current took the lighter stuff first. Silt, grit, flakes of rotted leaves, black sand. It spun away in thin ribbons. He tipped his hand, gentle, just enough to keep the slurry moving, just enough to keep from losing everything. The red-stained water flowed. The little hum filled his skull. The heavier bits settled. He breathed, slow, slow. The world narrowed. There was no wind. There was no pain. There was no Barlow, no Pike, no Rosamond groaning on the reef, no Montana with its debts and coughing fathers and sisters with cracked hands. There was only the creek and his palm and the last stubborn grit that refused to wash away. When the water in his palm finally ran mostly clear and the last of the black sand had slid off, he lifted his hand closer to his face. For a heartbeat, he saw nothing. Then the light, pale, thin winter light, hit just right. Something in his palm glowed. Not bright like candlelight, heavy, soft, warm, even in the cold. Gold. A sound came out of him. He didn't know what it was. A laugh, maybe. A sob. A choke. It didn't matter. His throat hurt with it. There, in the pale light, in the cradle of his shaking, half-frozen hand, sat 3 small flecks and 1 thin, curling flake the size of a fingernail. Gold. Real. Not a story. Not a promise. Not a drunken boast from a man with missing fingers. Gold. For a long moment, Caleb just stared. His mind tried to go everywhere at once, to his father's cough stopping, to June in a silk dress, to a deed paper in his hand saying Morgan C. But beneath that rush, there was something else. Something colder and cleaner and sharper. Survival. This wasn't treasure yet. This was proof. Proof that Merritt hadn't lied. Proof that Barlow had killed a man who had found something real. Proof that Caleb was standing on it now and Barlow wasn't. Which meant this creek, this exact cut between these twisted spruces in this frozen gut of nowhere, was the only thing in the world that truly belonged to Caleb Morgan. Right now, today, before anyone else knew. He closed his fist. God, it hurt. The cold bit so hard he thought his skin would shatter. He wrapped his bleeding, raw-wristed, half-numb hand tight around that gold like it was his own heart and brought it to his chest. Mine, he thought. The word rang through him like iron. Mine. Not in the way Barlow said mine. Not as a threat, as a vow. He crouched there, shaking, head bowed over his closed hand, and for the first time since the Rosamond's hull split against hidden rock and the sea tried to pull him under, he felt something that was not fear and not desperation. He felt belief. He could do this, not in a dream way, not in the way you tell your sister at a kitchen table because you don't want to see her cry. In a bone-deep, blood-hot, teeth-bared way. He could live here. He could survive this. He could stake this. He could mine this. He could beat Barlow. He could walk back south one day, not a boy making promises, but a man with a story the world would lean in to hear. He lifted his head. "All right," he whispered to the creek, voice raw. "You and me, then." The creek hummed back low, steady. He almost smiled. Then the hair on the back of his neck lifted. Not from cold, from warning. He froze. The air around him felt different. Still cold, still quiet. But not alone. That instinct, the one that had lit in him in Merritt's cabin just before the knock at the door, the one that had made him dive left on the ice a heartbeat before Reese could put a bullet in his spine, flared hard. Something was behind him. Very slowly, without standing all the way up, without making a big motion that would carry in the still air, Caleb turned his head. At first he saw nothing but white and shadow, and the black, crooked fingers of spruce against the pale sky. Then he saw it. In the snow, not 15 paces back from where he crouched at the creek, on the gentle slope that led down from the last ridge of twisted trees, was a print. Not a boot, a moccasin, smaller than Barlow's men, narrower, lighter, fresh, so fresh that he could still see where the thin crust of wind-set snow at the edge had broken and fallen inward. Someone was standing there, watching him. Caleb's heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. Very slowly he lifted his head the rest of the way and turned. At the crest of the small rise, half hidden in the shadows of leaning spruce and ice-bent brush, a figure stood. Not Barlow, not Reese, not one of theirs. Shorter, wrapped in pale winter furs that blended so well with the snow that Caleb's eyes had slid right past at first. No beard, a hood trimmed in white, a bow in one hand, not drawn, but not lowered. Dark eyes, steady, watching him with the cautious intensity of a wolf that's not sure yet if you're prey or threat. The figure tilted their head. Caleb swallowed. His hand was still closed around the gold. The cuts on his wrists had stopped bleeding in the cold and gone ugly dark. His coat hung torn and stiff from frozen salt water. He had no rifle, no knife. He was kneeling, vulnerable. He lifted his empty left hand, slow, palm out. "I don't want trouble," he said, his voice rough. The figure didn't answer. For a long breath, the only sound between them was the low, steady hum of the Iron Creek. Then the figure spoke. The voice was low and clear, and not Barlow's. "Good," the stranger said. Because trouble already found you?" Caleb's mouth went dry. The stranger nodded, once the smallest motion, toward the ridge beyond Caleb's shoulder. "3 men," the voice said quietly. "Guns, coming this way." Caleb's blood went cold. Barlow. They'd found his trail. For a split second, the world paused, hanging on the edge of a knife. The stranger's dark eyes flicked to Caleb's fist, still clenched tight against his chest. "You want to keep breathing?" the voice said calmly. "You come with me now." Caleb swallowed. "Who are you?" he whispered. The stranger's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Someone," they said, "who doesn't like Barlow either." Then the bow lifted, not aimed at Caleb, but past him. Caleb heard it then. Voices, distant but moving fast, wind carrying them just enough. "This way. I saw his damn tracks." "Shut up and spread," Barlow's man. Close. Caleb didn't think. He moved. He shoved the flecks of gold, all of them, warm and heavy and real, into the inner pocket of his torn coat, where he could feel them against his heart. Then he pushed himself to his feet on shaking legs. The stranger had already turned, moving silent and fast through the twisted spruce, not breaking crust, not leaving more than a whisper of sign. Caleb followed. Not because he trusted, not because he felt safe, because in that moment, between the singing creek and the broken hills and the approaching voices of men who wanted to use him and then bury him shallow, he understood something important and simple. Alaska was choosing sides, and he had just been offered one. To be continued in Part 4, Fire in the Snow. Viskazali, to be continued in Part 4. Fire in the Snow, ChatGPT, Skazal, perfect next chapter, Part 4. Fire in the Snow will open mid-flight. Caleb and the mysterious stranger will finally learn her name, escaping through the twisted spruce while Barlow's men track them. They'll move through a deadly whiteout, hide in a ravine, and share their first fire. A moment of wary alliance, tension, and revelation about merit, the gold, and who really know these lands. The fire in the snow will mean both the literal fire they build and the new spark of defiance in Caleb's chest, his transformation from survivor to hunter. Before I start writing Part 4, around 4,000 words, same cinematic style, do you want the stranger to be a woman? A local hunter-trapper guide, which adds contrast and depth? Or a man, a seasoned native or frontiersman, keeping the tone closer to Jack London adventure realism? Your choice will shape how I write the dialogue and atmosphere in this part. Viskazali, to be a woman, a local hunter-trapper guide, ChatGPT. Skazal Part 4, Fire in the Snow. The forest swallowed them. Not gentle, not like walking into shelter. It swallowed them like a mouth. Branches whipped past Caleb's face and shoulders, snapping back and scattering fine ice into the air. The twisted spruce crowded tight on all sides, their dark, crooked trunks so close together it felt like moving between ribs. Snow clung to low boughs in thick white clumps, and every time he brushed one, a cold sheet slid down the back of his torn coat like a hand. The woman barely touched anything. She moved low and fast, steps precise, almost gliding in that strange winter way where the feet don't stomp and don't crunch so much as skim across the crust. She didn't leave clumsy post-hole craters. She placed each foot with purpose. Her body flowed. Her bow rode in her left hand, easy, not up, not down, ready. Caleb lurched after her like something shot and still running. His breath sawed in and out, loud in his own ears. He tried to make it quieter and couldn't. His lungs burned, broken twigs snagged his coat. His shoulder throbbed so hard his teeth hurt. "Keep low," she hissed over her shoulder, barely looking back. He sucked cold, iron-tasting air. "Am low." "Lower if you want to keep that blood inside you." She veered left, slipping between two leaning spruces that had grown together and twisted, their trunks fused near the base like braided rope. Caleb tried to follow and caught his boot on a half-buried root. He stumbled, thrown off balance, and lurched hard into a bank of drifted snow. The snow came up to his thighs. His leg punched through the crust and stuck. He swore under his breath and yanked. It didn't move. His heart slammed. Behind them, carried thin through the trees and the pale light, a voice cut through the cold. "This way! I heard 'em! Barlow, here!" Caleb's blood went cold. He wrenched his leg again. The snow held him like plaster. The woman appeared in front of him like the forest had made her out of frost. One moment, she wasn't there. The next, she was crouched in the snow, face close, eyes dark and sharp and unafraid. "Stop fighting," she whispered. He jerked his chin back over his shoulder. "They're right. Stop fighting." Her gloved hands slid into the drift. One braced hard against the side of his knee. The other hooked under his boot heel. "Breathe out," she said. "What?" "Do it." He exhaled. In the same instant, she twisted his boot in a way that made his hips follow whether he wanted to or not. His leg slid free with a sucking sound. He almost fell backward. She caught the front of his coat and pulled him forward before he could crash, swallowed the stumble for him, turned, and shoved him ahead with one hand between his shoulder blades. "Move," she breathed. Caleb moved. He didn't ask questions. He didn't waste breath. He just followed. They wove through the trees, down the shallow flank of the hill, and then, suddenly, jarringly, the ground dropped away. He skidded to a halt at the crest of what looked, at first glance, like a break in the earth. A long, narrow scar cut through the snow and ran like a wound through the trees. It wasn't a stream. No water hummed here, no iron taste in the air. It was a split, a gash. The woman didn't hesitate. She swung her legs over the edge and slid down, boots first, into the white-blue cut. Caleb blinked. Then he followed, because the other choice was to turn around and walk back into Barlow's hands. The drop wasn't far, maybe the height of a tall man at its deepest point, but the walls were sharp and close, packed with frozen dirt and ice. Snow had settled into the split and hardened, so his slide down felt like scraping down smooth bone. He bit back a grunt when his wounded shoulder hit. He dropped the last foot and landed in a narrow trench of hard, wind-hollowed snow. Silence. Instantly. The wind, which had been clawing and hissing through the twisted spruce above, faded to a distant hum. The air in the trench was still and cold and close. The world above them turned into a pale strip, sky and bent treetops. He could hear his own breath. He could hear his heartbeat. And faintly, he could hear men. He pressed his back into the frozen wall, instinctively making himself small. The woman was already moving. She crouched low in the trench and pressed forward, motioning with 2 fingers. He followed, shoulders hunched. The ravine twisted left, then right. Sometimes it was only shoulder width. Sometimes it widened enough that he could have stretched both arms and not touched either side. Frost laced the walls in thin white veins. In places, frozen roots stuck out like knuckles. The whole thing felt hidden. Not natural hidden. Used hidden. "How did you find this?" he whispered. "I didn't," she whispered back without looking. "I made it." He blinked. "You... what?" "Snow settles like water," she said softly, slipping around a bulge of a frozen mud and ducking under a low overhang of ice. "Wind scours the tops. It dumps in the cuts. You come through in thaw and push down with a sled. Next winter it remembers. You walk it every time after. It remembers better. Listen." They both went still. Caleb held his breath. Above them, somewhere through the twisted trees and the blue lights and the layers of snow and ice, a man shouted, "Reese, you see 'em?" Another voice, closer, panting. "I got prints down by the Iron Creek. 2 sets. One's light. Fox light. The other's our boy. He's bleeding. He's—" "Shut up and look." Caleb felt his throat go tight. Barlow. He knew that voice now. Calm even when angry. Sharp even when shouting. Closer than he'd hoped. The woman raised one gloved finger and pointed upward, not at the pale strip of sky, but at a patch of overhanging root and ice maybe 20 feet ahead, where the trench narrowed and curved. That little gesture said everything. They'll pass above us, right there. Caleb nodded once. They moved. When they reached the curve, the woman dropped to the floor of the trench and slid under a low lip where snow had drifted in beyond an exposed root system. Caleb followed, biting down a groan as he folded himself small into a space that felt meant for an animal, not a man. They pressed in close. The roof of their little pocket was a tangle of frozen roots hung with icicles like teeth. Snow sealed most of the gaps. The light inside went gray-blue, nearly dark. He could feel her shoulder against his chest. He could smell cold fur and smoke on her clothing. His own breath sounded too loud. He tried to quiet it. Above them, boots crunched, close. He could hear the difference. Barlow's boots moved like pikes, quiet, deliberate, weight placed. Reese stomped heavy, angry, careless. The third man, Hawk, Barlow had called him, moved fast, quick-footed, excited, right above them now. Caleb held his breath. He could see flakes of snow falling past the small gap between the roots, stirred down by passing weight. He could see shadows move across the pale blue of drift-thin light. He could hear their voices with sickening clarity. "He's close," Hawk hissed, breathing hard. "He's close, Barlow, I swear it. Prints down by the cut, and there's fresh turn in the snow." He didn't just vanish. He didn't vanish, Barlow said mildly. "He's clever. He's scared. Scared men crawl. Watch for crawl. You think he's laying up in deadfall? Maybe. Or in a hollow. There's hollows in the ridges. I seen 'em. Little pockets. He could be curled up in one like a rabbit." "Reese," Barlow's voice soft, "did you check that stand of spruce back at the bend?" A snarl. "I said I did. And did you?" A beat. Then Reese spat. "Yeah, nothing there but rabbit sign." Barlow's boots creaked in the cold. Then Barlow said, very quietly, "He's bleeding less now." Caleb felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't even known that. But Barlow had seen it in the snow. Of course he had. "That means it's clotting," Barlow continued. "Means he's not leaking out in the white forest like a gentleman anymore. Means he had time to wrap it. Means he stopped somewhere long enough to think. Means he found food, or he'll be looking hard for it soon." "So?" Reese muttered. "So," Barlow said, patience gone thin. "He ain't dying like he's supposed to." Ice cold slid down Caleb's spine. Barlow's voice went almost thoughtful. "You know what that means?" Nobody answered. "It means," Barlow said softly, "if we let him go much longer, he stops being easy." Reese made an ugly sound. "Let him stop," he muttered. "I'll break his other arm when we catch him." "No," Barlow said. "You won't touch him unless I tell you to." Reese's boots stopped. "What?" Barlow's tone went flat. "You heard me." A tense silence crackled in the cold. Then Hawk cut in fast, eager to avoid whatever was about to spark. "We keep east," he said. "If he had that journal, he's running for whatever Merritt wrote, right? That creek that sings? He's headed that way." Barlow didn't answer for a moment. When he did, his voice had gone quiet and hungry. "Oh, he found it," he said. "He found something. You hear how Hawks's voice went all bright when he said, 'Creek that sings'?" Hawk let out a nervous laugh. "I didn't." "You did," Barlow said, amused. "Don't pout. You're bad at hiding want. That's why I keep you out front. Folks hear you coming, they get excited, they make noise, and then I hear them. It works." Hawk shut his mouth. Barlow's boots creaked again. Caleb could picture him up there, pale eyes scanning, mouth curved, mind already 5 steps ahead. "He found something," Barlow repeated softly. "He bent over something down there by that iron creek like it was holy. I saw the way his shoulders moved when we came up on him. That was prayer posture. You don't kneel like that for water. You kneel like that for pay dirt." Reese snorted. "So we circle and cut him off between here and the creek." "No," Barlow said. Reese snapped. "Then what in hell?" "We let him go ahead of us." Caleb blinked. His stomach knotted hard. Barlow's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper lost in the winter air. "Boys," he said, calm and patient, "you been north long enough to know what I'm about to say. You know how many men died up here because they swore they'd never share a claim?" "Plenty," Reese muttered. Barlow said. "No, not plenty. Almost all. You can't guard a claim alone. Not really. You try, you get knifed in your sleep, or frozen, or shot in the back swinging a pick. You can't work it alone fast enough neither. And this kid..." Caleb's jaw clenched. "This kid," Barlow went on, "don't know how to survive 3 nights out here alone. He's half dead already, and he don't even know it. You see his hands? Bleeding like butcher scraps. He ain't got a pan. He ain't got a shovel. He ain't got rope. He ain't got nothing but his stubborn. He'll find the sweet dirt and sit there staring at it like it'll turn itself into money." Hawk gave a small, eager laugh. Barlow smiled in his voice. "Exactly. So we let him walk to it," Reese said slowly. "And he leads us." Barlow said. "He'll bring us straight to Merritt's gold like a good boy. All we gotta do is keep him from getting himself killed by weather or wolves before he shows us." Reese grunted, impressed. Hawk let out a soft whistle. Caleb felt his chest go tight with anger and something colder than anger. "Control it," he told himself. "Don't move. Don't breathe." Barlow's boots shifted in the snow above, right over their shelter. Caleb could hear ice creak under his weight. For a moment, Caleb wondered. Could he hear us? Could he feel us? Then Barlow let out a quiet breath. "One more thing," he said. His voice lost all humor. "We're not the only ones out here." Caleb's skin prickled. Reese made an annoyed sound. "Barlow—" "Shut up," Barlow said softly. "You hear me? Shut up, listen, and learn." A pause. Barlow went on, voice low and calm. "Somebody else is moving with him." Caleb's pulse kicked hard. Hawk started. "You saw?" "I didn't see," Barlow said. "If I'd seen, we wouldn't be standing here talking. I felt it. You get to 5 winters, you start feeling things more than you see 'em. Tracks down there at the creek, 2 sets, 1 light, real light. Lighter than city boots, lighter than his. That ain't no man from Seattle. That's someone who belongs here." Reese spat. "Half-breed trapper. Or local Inupiat scout, Hawk muttered. Or Athabascan, Barlow said. Doesn't matter which. You listen now, 'cause this part's important. If they've taken an interest in our boy, that means he ain't wolf bait anymore. He's under somebody's wing. Reese scoffed. So what? So, Barlow said in a voice that went flat and dangerous, you do not shoot that somebody unless I tell you to. Reese made an ugly noise. You letting 'em walk? Since when do you... I don't pick fights I don't have to, Barlow said. I pick fights I win. You understand the difference, or you want I should draw you a little picture in the snow? Silence. Caleb could actually feel Reese's anger in the air like heat. Finally, Reese muttered, Yeah, I understand. Good, Barlow said, easy again. Hawk, you swing north. Reese, you swing south. Take it wide. Split 30 paces out and shadow. Don't close, don't spook. You see fire? Mark it and fall back. You hear him stop, you listen. I'll stay in his back trail nice and quiet. When the kid sets up to sleep. His voice went soft as a whisper. That's when we step in close. Caleb's stomach twisted. Not now, Barlow was saying. Not in daylight. Not while he's moving. Wait until he thinks he's safe. Move, Barlow said. Boots shifted. Snow crunched. Above them the shadows passed. One set of legs, then another, and then the ridge was empty again. The woman didn't move until the last creak of leather and faint crunch had faded into the thin winter distance. Only then did she breathe. Come, she whispered. Caleb swallowed. You heard him? He breathed back, barely shaping the words. He's not going to take a shot in daylight. We could run hard now, put distance. If we... She turned her head in the narrow space and looked him in the eye. Her eyes were dark, steady, alive, not panicked, not even afraid. Alert, yes. Cold, yes, but not afraid. Run hard, she whispered. To where? That shut him up. Her gaze flicked down to his shoulder, his wrists, his face. She was measuring him, fast and without pity. You won't live to sundown if I ask you for speed, she said softly. Not in this country. He's right about that. Caleb clenched his jaw. So what? He said through his teeth. We just let him follow? No, she said. Her mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. We make you disappear. They moved again, but now the movement changed. Before it had been escape, get low, break line of sight, outpace pursuit just long enough to hide. Now it was craft. She flowed through the trench like she'd carved it herself, which she had. Sometimes they stayed low in that ice-cut channel, and sometimes she led him up and out, climbing the frozen wall with gloved hands and boot-toe holds worn smooth by other passes. Each time they climbed, she kicked snow down behind them to blur the marks. When they crossed open patches, she walked in her own tracks, then brushed a spruce bough behind them in one smooth arc to soften the edges. When they moved under thicker trees, she ducked branches and never broke them. When they went across harder crust, she told him, Step flat. Don't punch. Don't stomp. Lay your foot. Lay it like you're setting it down to rest. He tried. He wasn't good, but he got better by the 10th step. Then better again by the 20th. After maybe an hour, though it could have been less, time in the cold felt slow and fast at once. She finally stopped. They were tucked into a fold between two low ridges, where the wind had dropped most of the snow into a drift on the far side, leaving this side almost bare, except for a skin of icy crust and a scatter of pale scrub. Dried willow branches stuck up from the ground like a cluster of thin bones. A half-rotten stump, hollowed by age, jutted from the slope. "This is where you disappear," she said quietly. Caleb frowned, chest heaving. "Where is this?" "Nowhere," she said. "That's the point." He blinked. "But if they follow—" "They won't." She pointed with her chin back the way they'd come. "I laid us over rock and old crust the last 100 paces. You didn't punch through. Good. The drift there," she jerked her head again to a darker swell behind them, "took most of our scent. Winds got the rest. They'll sweep past on the high line chasing your old trail. Barlow's smart, but he's still a man. Men look where tracks point. They don't look where the wind pushes what they can't see." Caleb stared at her. Her tone had not changed since the creek. Calm, flat, practical. But the more she spoke, the more he understood something. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't hoping. She knew. "You keep saying his name like you've hunted him before," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened just a fraction. "I've watched him before." "Watched," he said, "not stopped." Her eyes flicked to him. "You think you're the first man he tried to use?" His stomach turned. He shook his head. The cold was starting to slip deeper again. He could feel the edge of a headache forming right behind his eyes, that hollow ache that wasn't quite pain yet, but promised it. His shoulder wound, tied with torn coat seam, and his own stubbornness had gone mostly numb, and that felt wrong. His fingers tingled. His wrists had gone from bleeding to crusted dark lines that stung when he flexed. He swallowed. "If we're clear," he said, "why stop? Why not just keep going east? The creek—" "The creek will keep singing," she said. "You won't if you fall down." He opened his mouth to argue, then his knees buckled. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing snapped. The world didn't tilt. One moment he was standing, jaw set, telling himself he was fine. He was strong. He could walk until the sun fell and walk after that if he had to. The next, his legs just gave, like they'd been held up by willpower and habit and nothing else, and that willpower had finally slipped. He dropped to both knees in the crusted snow and couldn't stand back up right away. He swallowed hard. "Damn it," he whispered. Her face didn't change. Not pity, not mockery. Just a quiet, efficient assessment. "You held longer than most," she said. "That's good." He let out a breath that sounded tired and bitter. "Doesn't feel good." "It is," she said. She set her bow down in the snow and moved to the half-rotten stump. She crouched, dug gloved fingers under the rim, and pried. The top layer of dark, frozen rot came up like a lid. Caleb stared. Inside that stump, inside what looked like nothing but old, dead wood from the outside, was a hollow packed with dry things. Bundles of tiny twigs no thicker than toothpicks, shaved curls of birch bark, rolled moss gone pale and crisp as paper. A fire stash. His throat tightened. She glanced at him, and for the first time, there was something like a smile in her eyes. "This," she said quietly, "is how you live." Caleb swallowed. "You keep caches?" "Everywhere," she said simply. She pulled moss from the hollow and set it aside. Then she snapped off a handful of the twig bundles and tucked them under her arm, careful, like someone carrying something that mattered. She replaced the stump lid, burying the secret again under rot and snow-dark wood. "Help me," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Willow branches," she said, nodding toward the cluster of dead, pale twigs rising from the ground nearby. "Cut low. Don't leave tall breaks. I don't want that idiot with the scar looking down from a ridge and saying, 'Someone's been harvesting here.'" Her mouth twitched. "Reese is stupid, but he's not blind." Caleb nodded and went to work. His hands barely worked now. His fingers felt twice their size, numb and clumsy. But he could still break dead willow with slow, careful pressure. He bent the thin wands down to knee height before snapping them, instead of just snapping them upright. He set each piece in a small pile where she pointed. He watched how she moved and copied it. She took the willow and bent the flexible branches into a low half frame against the lee side of the drift. Not tall, not high, just enough to make a small crouched shelter, something you'd have to get down on your knees to crawl into. She wove the branches together fast, smooth, practiced. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be pretty. It was meant to look like nothing from a distance. When she was done weaving, she scooped snow with both gloved hands and packed it over the willow like plaster. The wet surface froze fast, sealing the little structure white. Only a single dark slit remained at one end. "Inside," she said. Caleb hesitated. "Can it hold both of us?" Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction. "You think I'm staying outside?" He let out a breath that might have almost been a laugh and crawled in on his hands and knees. The shelter was low enough that he had to hunch tight to fit. The willow frame creaked softly under his weight, then held. The packed snow sealed most of the wind. The world immediately went dim. Not dark, but muted, like being under a thick blanket. She followed him in. He shifted to give her room and found there was barely any, but she slid in like she'd done this 100 times. Their knees bumped, their shoulders touched. Her fur hood brushed his cheek. The air inside the little hollow warmed fast with their breath. He shivered so hard his teeth knocked. "Take your hands out," she whispered. He blinked. "What?" "Take them out of your sleeves," she said. "Show me." He pulled his hands free from where he'd been stuffing them up under his coat and held them out in the dim blue-white air. They looked bad. The rawhide had left red-purple lines sunk deep into the skin around both wrists, already swelling ugly. His fingers were cracked white at the knuckles, bled a little at the cuticles. Dirt and dried blood had frozen in thin, black lines under his nails. The cold had painted his fingertips a scary pale, almost waxy. She clicked her tongue once. Then she reached into the leather pouch at her belt and pulled out something that looked like a tightly rolled scrap of hide wrapped in sinew. She unrolled it on her knee. Inside were small things, each wrapped in its own twist, a sliver of bone like a needle, a few lengths of sinew thread, a pinch of something powder fine and dark, a scrap of cloth stiff with some kind of grease. He stared. "You're a doctor?" he whispered. That almost smile touched the corner of her mouth again. "No," she said. "Doctors live in towns." She tapped the pale powder with one gloved finger. "Spruce, pitch dried and ground. Keeps rot out." She nodded at the grease-stiff cloth. "Bear fat. Keeps the cold out of cuts. Doesn't freeze as fast as tallow. You'll smell like a den, but you'll keep your fingers." He swallowed. "You carry that everywhere?" "I carry it," she said quietly, "because every winter I meet someone who bleeds on my land and thinks he's the first man to think of gold." Caleb went still. "Your land," he said softly. Her eyes lifted and met his. They were dark, deep, steady. "Someone's land," she said. He understood the correction. "Not mine, like Barlow says mine." "Ours." He nodded, slow. She reached for his right wrist. He hissed. "Quiet," she whispered. She took his wrist in her hands, careful but firm, and cleaned the torn grooves the rawhide had left, rubbing bear fat into the angry skin. The shock of cold grease, then warm burn, made him suck in air between his teeth. Then she pressed a little pinch of the dark powder into the worst tear. It stung like fire. He jerked. She tightened her grip instantly and brought her face close enough that he could see the tiny scatter of freckles across the bridge of her nose under the hood's shadow. "Quiet," she repeated. He forced himself still. The sting ebbed to a throb. Then the throb settled into warmth. Then slowly the skin in his wrists stopped screaming and started humming. He let out a shaking breath. "Thank you," he whispered. She moved to the other wrist. "You're welcome," she said simply. His laugh came out tired. "You don't even know my name." "I don't need your name to keep your hand from rotting off," she said. His smile flickered in the dim. "Caleb," he said after a moment. "Caleb Morgan." Her hands never stopped working. "Caleb," she repeated quietly, testing it in her mouth like she was memorizing it, not because she needed it, but because she chose to. She finished with his wrists and then, without asking, reached up and touched the edge of the crude wrap job over his shoulder. He flinched. Her eyes flicked to his. "I'm not going to break you." He let out a breath and nodded. She peeled the torn strips of coat back with careful fingers, not ripping, not jerking. The numb skin under the cloth met the air and burned. He clenched his jaw so hard it ached. "Bullet grazed," she murmured. "Lucky." "I noticed," he rasped. She ignored that. She cleaned the wound with snow first, packing a handful in and pressing until his eyes filled with involuntary tears, then wiped it with the same bare fat cloth, sealing the edges in grease and dark powder. Her hands were sure. Fast. No wasted motion. He stared at her in the dim blue light. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked softly. Her jaw moved once, like she was deciding how much to give him. "Since I was old enough to run a line alone," she said finally. He swallowed. "How old is that?" She glanced at him, and in that glance there was a tiny spark of defiance, or humor, or warning not to treat her like something fragile. "Old enough," she said, and handed his makeshift bandage back to him. "Hold that there. Tight." He grinned, despite the pain. "All right, then." They sat like that a moment, knees touching in the low, white hollow. His hand pressed over the wound at his shoulder, her kit of bone, needle, and sinew and pitch open on her knee. Their breath warmed the small space. Outside, the world was pale and deadly, all broken hills and singing iron water and the patient hunger of men like Barlow. In here, there was life. For the first time since Merritt's cabin, Caleb felt heat that wasn't stolen, wasn't luck, wasn't desperation. It was made, intentional, a little fire in the snow. "Do we make a fire?" he whispered. "Small," she said. "No smoke." He blinked. "No smoke." She smiled with her eyes again. "You Southern," she said softly. "You build a big blaze and call it safety. Up here, fire's not for light. It's for heat. Light's just you being foolish enough to brag you're alive." He let out a breath that could have been a laugh. "Right." She began to work. From the stump stash, she took the birch curls and rolled moss. She cupped them in her hands like a bird. Then she leaned over and, with calm, practiced movements in the cramped space, struck steel against flint. The first shower of sparks died cold. The second caught. The third bloomed. The moss glowed. then pulsed, then licked into a tiny orange ember. She breathed on it, slow and steady, feeding it like a mother feeds a child. When it opened into the smallest, quietest tongue of flame, she added one twig, then another, then 3 more, no thicker than matchsticks. The fire stayed no bigger than a cupped hand. It threw almost no light. But the heat kissed his cracked knuckles and his numb fingertips and his blood-stiff shoulder and almost made him groan. He exhaled shakily. "God," he whispered. Her lips curved just a little. "Careful," she murmured. "He doesn't come this far north, I heard." A broken laugh escaped him. They crouched over that palm-sized flame like it was treasure. She fed it slow, never letting it flare, never letting it smoke, always keeping it hungry and low. After a minute, she speared one of the dried meat strips from the cache on the tip of her bone needle and held it over the ember, turning it until the fat softened and the salt woke and the sharp, rich smell filled the tiny space. Caleb swallowed. His stomach cramped so hard it hurt. She pulled the meat back and handed it to him without a word. He wanted to tear into it. He made himself take a small bite. The warmth hit his tongue, and he almost groaned. He chewed slow, eyes closing without meaning to. "Eat," she whispered. "Small, often. Don't drown yourself all at once. Your belly'll cramp and steal your strength." He nodded, mouth full, grateful in a way he did not have words for. He swallowed, breath shaking. "Thank you," he said again, quiet. She gave a short, practical nod, like he'd just thanked her for handing him a saw. "You won't die today," she said. That's all. He let out a breath that sounded too close to a laugh. They sat in that dim white pocket, sharing pieces of warmed meat and tiny heat, and for a minute, just a minute, the world outside felt far. The ache in his bones eased, the shaking in his muscles slowed. His thoughts, which had been running on fear for so long they'd forgotten how to do anything else, finally leveled. After a long quiet, he said softly, "What's your name?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the ember, watchful. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost that sharp, efficient tone. It was still quiet, still controlled, but something in it shifted, opened. "Annika," she said. He repeated it under his breath, almost like an oath. "Annika." Her eyes flicked to him. "And you're Caleb Morgan from the south," she said. "Came up on a boat. Thought you'd make yourself rich." His jaw tightened, embarrassed. "Something like that." And you," he said, "don't like Barlow." The calm in her face cooled. "No." "What did he do to you?" Caleb asked softly. Annika's eyes went flat and distant just for a moment. "He didn't do it to me," she said. Caleb's stomach twisted. "Who?" he whispered. Annika looked up from the flame and met his eyes. "My brother," she said simply. There was no tremor in the words, no break. That almost made it worse. "He wasn't stupid," she went on quietly. "He wasn't soft. He wasn't one of those men who walked up here with city hands and thought the North was just a cold San Francisco. He was born here. He knew winter. He wasn't greedy. He just wanted enough for a new sled team and a metal stove for our mother so she wouldn't cough all winter. That's all." Her jaw worked once, tight. "Barlow promised him partnership," she said. Caleb felt something hot light behind his eyes. "He came back with nothing," Annika said. 3 days after the thaw. Only his coat, and not even all of him inside it. Silence filled the little hollow. Wind hissed soft outside. Caleb swallowed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Annika nodded once, like she was noting a fact, not accepting sympathy. Since then, she said softly, I watch Barlow. I watch where he moves. I watch who goes with him and doesn't come back. I watch the way he studies land that isn't his. I watch how he smells like he owns the river. Her eyes sharpened. I don't let him own it. Caleb met her gaze. The ember between them hummed quietly. This, he realized, wasn't just about him and his survival. This wasn't just about Merritt's Creek. This was a quiet war already happening in these hills, and he had walked into it carrying a light without even knowing he was holding it. You heard what he said, Caleb whispered. He's not stopping. He's going to shadow me. He's going to wait until I rest, and then he's going to take me. He thinks I don't know how to live out here. Annika's mouth twitched. He's not wrong, she said. Caleb huffed a breath. Thank you. You're welcome. He pinched the bridge of his nose, then winced because his skin cracked there too. So what do I do? What do we do? I can't lead him to that creek. Not now. Not like this. If I just walk there and start digging with my hands like a fool, he'll take it. He'll take it, and he'll... His jaw tightened. Use me until I'm empty. Then he'll leave me for the wolves like Merritt. Annika's eyes were steady on him. You're thinking, she said. I'm trying. Good, she said. Keep doing that. He let out a slow breath. He said he doesn't pick fights, he doesn't win. He meant it, Annika said. Caleb looked at her. Can you win a fight with him? A tiny smile ghosted across her mouth. Not happy, not cocky, dangerous. Not today, she said. Not like this, not just me and you, in a hole in the snow with a toy fire and 2 strips of meat. Caleb swallowed. So when? Her eyes flicked down to the ember, then back up. At night, she said softly. On our ground, not his. Caleb frowned. He said he'd come at night. Yes, she said. So we're just waiting to die quieter? Her eyes flashed. No, she said. We're waiting for him to think that. He stared at her for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, he understood. Night changes rules. Night pulls men close to heat. Night makes them take off their gloves and loosen their coats and set their rifles against stumps and talk low and easy because they believe the dark is theirs. Night makes men like Barlow think they're hunters sitting above a snare. Night can flip. A slow, fierce smile crept over Caleb's face. Different from before, different from his farm boy grin, different from the way he'd smiled to reassure June. This one felt like his bones understood it. How? He whispered. Annika's gaze didn't waver. First, she said, I teach you to walk quiet. Then I teach you where to sleep so the ground doesn't tell on you. Then we make a false fire. A what? A fire they can see, she said, but we're not in. We let him come close. We let him settle in to take you. We let him step where we want him to step. Caleb's chest tightened. And then, Annika's voice went calm and cold. Then, she said, we cut his throat. Caleb swallowed hard. In his mind, for a split second, he saw Barlow not as the calm, pale-eyed man in Merritt's doorway, but as a body cooling in red snow. He thought of Barlow's hand on his throat in that cabin, his voice soft as he said, I'll leave you alive. He thought of Barlow calling him mine. He thought of Annika's brother's coat coming home, without all of him inside it. He nodded once. Good, he whispered. Then he let out a breath that shook. There's one more thing. Annika's eyebrows lifted a fraction. What? Caleb's hand slid, almost without him meaning to the inside pocket of his torn coat. His fingers found it there, cold now from the air, but still with that strange, heavy warmth in his mind. Gold. He pulled his hand back out and opened it between them. 3 flecks. One thin curl, just enough to shine in the tiny ember glow. The light from their palm-sized fire kissed it and made it come alive. Annika inhaled. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't gasp like someone in a dime novel. But her eyes, steady and controlled until now, widened just a fraction, and that fraction told Caleb everything. It was real. It mattered, not just to him, to her, to anyone up here trying to live on their own terms. "Merits?" she whispered. Caleb nodded. Annika's jaw tightened. "Then this," she said softly, "is worth killing for." Caleb swallowed. "And dying?" Her eyes lifted to his. "If we're stupid," she said. He let out a small breath. "I'm done being stupid," he said quietly. Her mouth curved at one corner. "Good," she said. The ember between them pulsed. Outside, above the snow-packed shelter and the drift and the hollowed stump and the careful erased tracks, the pale winter sun slid lower, turning the world blue and silver. The broken hills threw long shadows. The creek that sang hummed softly to itself in its iron bed. Somewhere, not far, a raven called once, and then went silent. And somewhere else, between the trees, on a ridge, not yet in sight, but drawing closer with every patient, measured step, Barlow followed a trail he thought he understood, smiling to himself. Night was coming, and with it, fire. To be continued in part of where? The false camp. Вы сказали ок, чат GPT сказал, отлично, продолжаем ту же линию. В part C, The false camp, мы сделаем так. Анника учит Калеба двигаться бесшумно и не оставлять следы. Они готовят ложный лагерь, костер, приманку. Берлоу подходит, думая, что победил. План почти срабатывает, но не идеально. Что-то идет не так. Финал будет на мощном клиффхенгере. Захват, рана, выстрел в темноте, кто-то исчезает. Дальше история пойдет к тому, как Калеб уже не просто выживает, а начинает отвечать. Если ты готов, я могу сразу писать партфайтой таким же стилем и объемом, как предыдущие части. Вы сказали, да, чат GPT сказал, part via, the false camp. By late light, that strange cold light that isn't really day anymore, but still not night, the hills turned blue. Not soft blue, iron blue, the kind that lives in deep bruises and winter shadows. The creek that sang was behind them now, hidden under a tangle of bent spruce and a bank of packed ice, where Annika had brushed snow to wipe away all sign of his kneeling. Caleb checked 3 times over his shoulder, just to be sure he hadn't left something obvious, like a boot hole, that screamed, "Here," to a man like Barlow. Each time Annika said only, "No," and moved. She didn't waste words in the open. Talking was for cover. Teaching was for cover, too, but she did that while they moved. "Step flat," she whispered. "Not heel first. You slam a heel, you punch through. You go flat, you spread your weight." Caleb shifted, adjusting his gait. His thighs ached from holding tension with every step. "Good," she said. "Now, softer." He made it softer. "And don't swing your arms like you're marching to music. That wind cuts your coat and leaves 2 little tails in the snow. Tells a tracker you're tired." Caleb frowned. "How can snow?" "Everything tells a tracker you're tired," she said. "When you get tired, you stop thinking about hiding. That's when you die." He shut his mouth and worked on not dying. They stayed low among bent spruce and dip spots, where snow had drifted deeper than his knees, but packed tight and hard. Annika showed him how to slide his body through willow-like water, so the branches bent and whispered, but didn't snap and shout. They crossed on old wind crust where she tested first with the side of her boot, rocking weight slow. If it held her, it held him. If it cracked under her, they backed off and went around. He wasn't allowed to guess. Guessing, she said, is just a loud way of saying, I hope I don't break my leg. By the time the sun was a smear of silver behind low cloud, and the temperature dropped fast enough that his breath felt like smoke, Caleb's whole body thrummed with cold, hunger, and the wired burn of not quite fear. It wasn't the panicked kind. It was the kind that makes every sound brighter, makes the hairs on your arms stand, makes you feel like you could smell danger if the wind turned. He understood something walking like that. This was what Barlow had meant by the second fire. Only now the fire didn't belong to Barlow. They stopped at the edge of a shallow basin ringed with black spruce. At first, Caleb thought it was just another dip in the land where snow gathered. Then his eyes adjusted. There was shape here, use. Here, Annika whispered. The basin wasn't large, maybe the size of a small cabin's footprint, and it wasn't deep, only waist-high at its lowest point. But the wind didn't hit it clean. The trees around it leaned inward in a rough ring, their bent tops knitting a loose roof of dark branches and trapped snow. The ground inside wasn't flat. It sagged a little more in the center, and that center was marked by a blackened circle in the snow, crusted and low. A fire pit, old, used, hidden. Caleb's chest tightened. "You've done this before," he whispered. Her mouth barely moved. "Yes." For other men Barlow wanted? Her eyes flicked to him, unreadable. "For whoever needed it," she said. He nodded once, throat tight. In the last light, this basin was almost invisible, unless you were standing inside it. From above, it just looked like drift and dark brush. Even walking past, you might not see the shallow depression under the snow unless you knew to look for the way the branches angled. Annika slid down into the hollow. Caleb followed, boots hissing softly in hard snow. She crouched and ran her gloved hand over the old fire pit. Her fingers came away, faintly gray. "You don't build fires in the open," she said quietly. "Too easy to see. You build them in pockets like this." Caleb nodded. "Tonight, we build two." He blinked. "Two?" "One for him to see," she said, "and one for us." Caleb felt something slow and fierce build in his chest. "Tell me," he whispered. Annika looked at him like a hunter weighing whether her companion was going to steady or ruin the shot. Apparently he passed, because she tipped her chin toward the cluster of fallen branches and old dead spruce off to the right. "We take some of that," she said. "The dry stuff, quiet, nothing that'll snap like a gunshot. We make him a camp just up over that small rise." She pointed with her mouth to a little bump of snow and scrub to the west, where the trees open and you can see a glow from far. Caleb frowned. "But if he can see that, anyone can see that." "That's what we want," she said. "We want him to see you as dumb and freezing and relieved you got a fire going. We want him to feel safe walking in." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And us?" "We sleep here," she said simply. Caleb's heart gave a little hard kick. "That close?" "If you can hear a man breathe," Annika said softly, "you can kill him without him shouting." The air in his lungs felt sharp. She said it like she was telling him how to tie a rope. He swallowed. "What happens when he comes in? He's not stupid. He won't just walk into the light." "No," she said. "He won't. Barlow never steps first. He'll send Reese or the jumpy one with the bad ear." "Hawk," Caleb said. "Hawk," she echoed. "He'll send them forward. He'll watch," Caleb said quietly, thinking it through. "He'll see how you move, what you do, where you stand. He'll wait and measure. He won't risk his own throat unless he thinks it's already over." "Yes," she said. Caleb exhaled. "So, we don't kill Barlow first?" "No," she said. "We take his teeth first." Teeth. Reese. Hawk. He could see it now. See why. A wolf alone was dangerous. A wolf with a pack was death. You take the pack first. You make the alpha bleed alone. He nodded once, slowly. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Do you trust me?" she asked back. He didn't answer right away. Trust is something men from the South throw around cheap. Should I trust him? He's a good man. We shook hands. Barlow had used that word with merit, partnership, trust, brotherhood. Then merit had come back in pieces. Caleb thought about that. He looked at Annika's face in the falling light. Her features were sharp in a clean way, winter cut, all edges, and no extra softness. Her skin was deepened by the cold and the wind, not fragile. Her mouth had that stubborn angle, the one he'd seen even when she was calm. Strands of dark hair had escaped the fur hood and stuck to her cheek. Her eyes were steady, watching him the way she watched the land. No hurry, no apology. He remembered her hands fixing his wrists without flinching at the blood. He remembered her just saying, "My brother," and nothing else, like the rest could be left between the trees. He remembered her dragging him out of the snow when he got stuck because he panicked. Caleb nodded. "Yes," he said, honest, quiet. Annika gave a single small nod in return. "Good," she said. "Then right now you do nothing." He blinked. "Nothing?" "You sit," she said. "You breathe. You don't move unless I tell you to move. You don't talk unless I talk to you. You let your hands warm and your legs stop shaking, so that when I tell you to run or fight, you don't fall on your face." He opened his mouth, then he shut it. That was a better plan than stagger around and try not to die. He sank down in the basin, back against the frozen dirt. The cold bled into him instantly through his clothes, but at least here the wind wasn't cutting him open. He pulled his coat tighter across his chest and tucked his chin down, trying to rest his eyes without letting them close all the way. Annika vanished. That's what it looked like. One moment she was there, crouched in the basin with him, bow across her knees. The next, she melted into the dark like the snow had swallowed her. No snap of branch, no crunch. One heartbeat there, the next heartbeat gone. Caleb stared at the spot where she'd been. "Okay," he whispered under his breath, to himself, to the broken hills, to the cold air that tasted like iron. "Okay, that's not unsettling at all." He breathed. The sky dimmed to blue, then darker blue, then that strange northern twilight where it feels like the world is holding its breath. Shadows lengthened. The black, twisted spruce looked like hunched figures in the half-light. Cold started creeping into his bones again, slow as a promise. He wanted to check the gold. He didn't. He knew it was there in his inner pocket, warm against his chest where his body heat kept it from going dead cold. He could feel that curl, that weight. Proof. He touched the pocket once with numb fingers, just to be sure, still there. Good. Then he forced his hand away and curled his arms over his ribs again. "Don't think about South," he told himself. "Don't think about Pa. Don't think about June. Don't think about buying the North Field back. Don't think about a real doctor and running water in the kitchen and June's hands not being cracked and old. Not now. Not here. Think about breathing in, breathing out, staying awake. He watched his breath puff white in front of his face and vanish. Time blurred. It might have been minutes. It might have been an hour. Then a glow rose through the trees. Caleb stiffened. At first he thought it was Barlow, that they'd already been found. His pulse spiked so fast it hurt. He pushed himself half up, every muscle ready to run or swing or just throw himself into the snow and claw, anything but sit. Then he realized the glow wasn't moving. It was steady, soft, low. A fire, a small one. Exactly where Annika had said she'd put it, up over that slight rise, between two stunted spruce whose branches forked outward like crooked antlers. It flickered just high enough to touch the needles above it with a warm pulse, then dropped. No plume of black smoke in the cold air, no giant orange shout, just enough that a man in the dark would see it from 50 paces and think, safe. Caleb let out the breath he'd been holding. She did it. He swallowed. Okay, now we wait. The cold deepened, settling heavy and damp into the cloth of his coat. His shoulder throbbed, his wrists hummed, his eyelids felt like they had weight to them. Stay awake, stay awake, stay. A hand touched his mouth. His whole body jerked hard. A sound leapt to his throat by reflex, muffled instantly by that palm. Shh, Annika's voice breathed right at his ear, low and urgent. Easy. Quiet. His heart hammered against her hand like it wanted out. She let go his mouth, but not his attention. They're coming, she whispered. His blood turned to ice. Where? He breathed. North Rim, she murmured. 2 of them. Barlow's hanging back so far I can't see him yet. He'll circle east to cut off a run. Reese and Hawk are coming in from the fire. Both? He whispered. At once? He sent them as a pair, she said. He doesn't trust either one alone anymore. You did that? Caleb blinked. Me? You kicked Reese in the pride when you shot him, she said, voice flat. And Hawk's still green. He twitches when he's excited. Barlow doesn't like twitch, so he sends them together now, so if one does something stupid, the other won't run. Or so one can tell him how the other died. Either way. Caleb swallowed. Her hand squeezed his shoulder once, the uninjured one. Listen, she whispered. Here's what happens. You're going to stay down. All the way down. Don't move, no matter what you hear. His stomach turned cold and tight. What are you going to do? Take his teeth, she said. The way she said it made something electric shiver down his spine. Before he could say anything else, she melted away again. One heartbeat, she was crouched beside him in the blue, dark basin, eyes narrow and bright. The next heartbeat, she slid into shadow and was gone. He was alone, completely alone. Suddenly, the cold doubled. He sank lower into the basin, forcing himself down, shoulders tucked, jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He pressed his body against the frozen dirt sidewall until his cheek went numb. He pulled his coat tight, not for warmth, but to make himself smaller. He slowed his breathing until each inhale barely moved his ribs. Above the rim of the basin, branches shifted. Soft, careful. Then voices low. There, see? I told you. He's right there. Hawk, eager. Whispering, but trying not to whisper. I ain't blind, Reese hissed back. Then you see the fire. I see a glow, pup. Anybody could set a glow. You think Barlow's wrong? Shut up about Barlow and keep your damn head down. Caleb pressed himself flatter. Their voices were close, too close. He couldn't see them from where he lay, only the edge of the basin where black, twisted spruce roots clawed at the sky. but he could hear the way their feet moved in the snow above. Hawk moved quick, light, little half steps. Reese moved heavier, slower. Caleb pictured Reese's jaw clenched against the pain in his arm, anger running ahead of his caution. A shadow crossed the faint light of the false fire. Caleb held his breath until his chest burned. He heard Hawk hiss under his breath in excitement. See? I told you. Little idiot built a fire like a—" Then Hawk's voice cut off. Not stopped. Cut, like somebody grabbed it in a fist. There was a muffled scuffle sound, a grunt, a low, strangled noise that didn't even have time to turn into a shout. Caleb's eyes went wide. A heartbeat later, something heavy hit the snow with a soft, final thud. Reese hissed, "What the Hawk? Hawk? Where you at, pup? Hawk?" Silence. Caleb could hear the ice in Reese's breathing now. Snow creaked under Reese's boots. He moved fast, circling, steps crunching in a tight radius just beyond the lip of the basin. Then Reese snarled, voice low and shaking with anger. "Barlow!" "Oh, God!" Caleb's pulse hammered. The snarl choked in Reese's throat and turned into a raw, wet sound. Caleb clamped his jaw so hard he tasted blood. Another heavy drop into the snow. Then silence again. Real silence. Winter silence. The kind that hums. Caleb's heart pounded so loudly he was sure the trees could hear it. "Don't move. Don't move. Don't—" A shape slid over the lip of the basin and dropped down into the hollow in one smooth, silent motion, landing in a crouch not 5 feet from Caleb. Annika. Her bow was still in her left hand. In her right hand, she held a knife. Not a kitchen knife, not a farmer's blade. A short, ugly thing wrapped in leather, dark with use. The blade itself was matte, not shiny, so it hadn't thrown light when she moved. Practical, quiet, made for this. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes were calm. Her cheek had a smear of dark across it. Blood, not hers. Caleb swallowed hard. "Stay quiet," she whispered. He nodded, throat tight. Her eyes flicked toward the little glow of the false fire up beyond the rise. "One more," she breathed. "Wait." Caleb's blood turned to ice. One more. Barlow. Barlow himself. Cold spread through Caleb's limbs, not from winter this time, but from the shape of the thought. Barlow is coming. Into the open. Close enough to touch. Annika slid back into the shadows at the basin's rim, low, cat silent. Caleb lay where he was, heart slamming against his ribs so hard it almost hurt more than his shoulder. He wanted to see. He wanted to lift his head and see. He wanted to watch Barlow's face when he realized his boys weren't going to answer. He stayed down. Above him, footsteps, different footsteps, measured, almost lazy. Then a voice drifted down, quiet and annoyed and almost conversational. "Well," Barlow murmured, "now, this is interesting." Caleb's breath hitched. Barlow. He sounded inconvenienced, not scared, not yet, but not bored either, alert, like a man who just stepped in what he thought was puddle and realized it might be a deep hole. Caleb pictured him there in the dark, fur collar dusted with frost, pale eyes scanning, revolver low and steady in his hand. Barlow never let his gun hang. Barlow never relaxed his wrist. Barlow exhaled softly. "You still breathing, boy?" he called, voice low and almost pleasant. "You down there with your little blanket and your little fire? Or did my new friend here make you stop?" New friend? He meant Annika. Caleb's stomach twisted. Barlow kept talking, voice easy, like he was telling a story by a stove. "See, I've been generous," he said. "I gave you a chance. I didn't break your bones. I didn't nail that cabin door. I let you walk. I told my boys, you watch him, you don't kill him, 'cause I'm a man of my word. I said that, didn't I? I said that like a gentleman." Caleb's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Barlow sighed, louder, as if for Caleb's benefit. "But then you went and found yourself a little wolf," he said. "And I don't like little wolves I didn't raise. So now here we are in the snow like thieves in the same chicken coop, and I got 2 boys who aren't answering me, and I'm just about out of polite." He paused, then his voice sharpened. "Listen to me now," he said, tone low and tight and edged. "You give me that journal, boy, and you both get to wake up tomorrow. That's all I want. I'll even let you keep a pan and a shovel. I ain't greedy. I ain't—" There was a whisper of movement. Caleb didn't see it. He only heard 3 sounds, quick and close together. A hiss like someone cutting air with a short stroke. Barlow's breath catching in a sound that was more fury than pain. And the sharp, metallic clatter of something hitting ice, his revolver. Caleb's pulse spiked so hard he almost blacked for a second. "Did she get him? Did she get him? Did she—" "Easy," Barlow said, and now his voice wasn't pleasant at all. It was low and precise and hot. "Easy there, girl. You're quick, I'll grant you that. Damn near took my thumb off. You step any closer, I'll put this other hand through your throat with my knife and watch you bleed in the snow." Caleb's stomach bottomed. No, Barlow still had another blade. Of course he did. Of course a man like that never came in with only one. Silence. And in that silence, Caleb heard something else. Breath. 2 sets. Annika's, controlled even, cold. Barlow's, steady but edged. They were close. Close enough to smell each other's breath. Close enough to feel each other's heat in the freezing air. Caleb's mind fired through possibilities like sparks. If she kills him now, she wins everything. But if she moves wrong, he'll cut her. And if he cuts her, if she dies, Barlow wins. He didn't think. He moved. Every part of his body screamed not to. Every smart voice in his head said, "Stay down, you idiot. She told you to stay down." Every survival lesson in his bones said, "Let the hunter hunt. You'll only get in their way." He moved anyway. He surged up out of the basin in a rush of cold and pain and instinct. Snow flew out from his coat. His shoulder lit up in white, hot agony. The world spun blue and black and silver. Barlow's face hit his vision like a shot. He was right there, less than an arm's length away, crouched on the lip of the basin, his left hand out, open, palm toward Annika in a fake peace gesture, his right hand low and tight, holding a long, narrow knife aimed upward toward her ribs. He had blood on his left wrist. Hawk's? Reese's? His own? Caleb didn't know. His pale eyes snapped to Caleb the instant Caleb broke cover. They widened, just a flicker. That flicker was all Caleb had. He threw himself at Barlow, not like a boxer, not like a fighter, like a farmhand tackling a calf that's jumped the fence. He slammed into Barlow with everything he had left. Barlow grunted, surprised, not hurt, and twisted. The knife flashed. Caleb felt a line of fire across his ribs as the blade scraped through coat and skin. He grabbed for Barlow's knife wrist with both hands. Barlow's strength hit him like running into a post. He was not huge, not big, not broad like a storybook outlaw. He was coiled. Every inch of him felt like braided rope and iron bar. His muscles didn't give. Caleb roared through his teeth and held anyway. "Run!" he yelled, voice breaking in the cold. "Annika, run!" "No," Annika snapped. Her voice was so sharp it cut through everything. The cold, the pain, the animal panic. It hit him like a command. In that same instant, she moved. He didn't quite see it. He was busy wresting Barlow's knife hand away from his own throat. But he felt it in the shift of weight and the crack of impact. Annika's knee drove into the side of Barlow's. Barlow hissed and staggered a half step. It was half a step. But in a fight that close, in cold this sharp, half a step was a canyon. Caleb wrenched Barlow's knife arm to the side with all the leverage he had. The blade skidded off frozen dirt instead of Annika's ribs. Annika's hand flashed. Her ugly little knife came up under Barlow's jaw so fast it was like it popped there. For a frozen half-second, everything held in a single terrible stillness. Caleb held Barlow's right wrist, muscles shaking. Barlow froze in a half-crouch, one knee dipping from the hit, left hand still raised like a peace offering, pale eyes blazing, breath steaming in short white bursts. Annika knelt in front of him, close, her face calm, her eyes flat, her blade kissing the soft flesh just under his jaw. Nobody breathed. Snowflakes drifted between them in the blue dark. Then Annika spoke, very softly. "Drop it." Barlow smiled. Even with a knife under his jaw, even with Caleb on his wrist, shaking and bleeding and desperate, even with two of his men cooling in the snow, he smiled. "Now," he murmured, voice low and almost fond, "this is a picture I'll remember." Annika's knife pressed harder. Blood welled, a thin red line against pale skin. Barlow hissed softly through his teeth. Then his knife fell from his fingers and hit the snow. Caleb sagged with relief so hard he almost dropped with it. Annika didn't move her blade. "On your knees," she whispered. Barlow chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart," he said softly, "I already am." Her eyes didn't flicker. "Hands behind your head." Barlow raised both hands slow, until they were laced behind his head. Caleb swallowed hard. It was done. They had him. They had Barlow. Barlow on his knees in the snow, bleeding from the throat, hands laced behind his head like a sinner. Caleb almost laughed. He almost cried. He almost told Barlow, "I told you I'd put you in the ground." He didn't get the chance. A branch cracked behind him. Not small, not close, behind him. From the dark, beyond the basin. Caleb turned his head, heart in his mouth. A silhouette stood there in the tree line, 10 paces out. A man, wide through the shoulders, wrapped in fur. Rifle leveled, steady. Not Reese. Reese was already cooling. Reese wasn't standing like that. Not Hawk. Hawk twitched. This rifle didn't twitch. This man's aim was stone. Barlow's smile widened, slow and full of something like pride. "Boys," he said brightly, as if the night up here in the freezing dark were a poker table, and he'd just laid down a good hand. "This here is Whitlow. I didn't mention Whitlow." The rifle in the dark did not waver. Caleb's stomach fell out. Annika's eyes flicked just once toward the new threat. Barlow moved. It wasn't strength. It was timing. In the same heartbeat that Annika's focus shifted that hair's breadth toward the rifle, Barlow snapped his head forward and down, hard. His forehead smashed into Annika's mouth. There was a dull, wet crack. Annika gasped. Only that. Only a gasp, and her knife slipped just enough. Barlow twisted like an eel. Caleb grabbed for him, shouting, but Barlow ripped his right wrist free with a brutal jerk that tore something in Caleb's already ruined shoulder. White pain exploded up Caleb's side. His fingers flew open. Barlow rolled. Caleb lunged. Whitlow fired. The gunshot split the cold. Caleb's ears rang white. Annika hit the snow. For a heartbeat, Caleb couldn't tell if she'd dropped of her own will or if she'd been thrown. All he saw was her fur hood jerk back, her body twist, and dark splash out across the blue-white snow like spilled shadow. No. He didn't even know if that shout came from his throat or just his head. Barlow came up in that same explosion of motion, one hand clamped against his bleeding neck, the other scrabbling in the snow for the dropped knife. Caleb didn't think. He launched himself at Whitlow. The gunman was still working the bolt back to cycle another round. He hadn't expected the boy to charge him. He'd expected the boy to dive for cover or freeze in panic. That half-breath of miscalculation was all Caleb had. He slammed into Whitlow at full run. Whitlow was heavier, stronger, set solid like a cut tree stump. Caleb hit him anyway. The rifle barrel swung wide in the impact, cracking against a tree. Whitlow cursed. Caleb grabbed for the rifle with both hands. Pain tore through his shoulder so violently, he almost blacked out. The world went gray around the edges. He tasted iron. He held on anyway. "Run!" he heard someone shout in a voice that might have been Annika's, or might have been his own memory of her voice. He couldn't tell. "Caleb, run!" Whitlow's fist slammed into Caleb's ribs, hard, low. Caleb's breath left his body in a single, soundless burst. He staggered back, gasping, vision white. Whitlow yanked the rifle free and snapped it back toward Caleb, fast, practiced. Caleb threw himself sideways behind a half-fallen spruce. The rifle cracked again. Bark exploded. Splinters sliced Caleb's cheek, hot and sharp. "Whitlow!" Barlow's voice, raw with anger and blood. "Stop! I want—" Caleb didn't hear the rest. He was already scrambling blind through the crooked, ice-bent spruce, lungs burning, shoulders screaming, ribs on fire, vision swimming with white sparks. Snow slapped his face. Branches tore at his coat. He had no direction except away, no plan except live. "Caleb!" Barlow's voice, behind him now, too close, too close. "Caleb, listen to me." Caleb ran, not fast, not clean, not quiet like Annika taught him. He ran wild. He ran because if he stayed in that basin 1 second longer, Barlow was going to get his hand on him. And then all of this. The creek, the gold, Annika, Merritt, his father's cough, June's cracked red hands. The promise he'd made to himself in the root hollow would mean nothing. Branches whipped him. Ice clawed his boots. His blood felt like it was freezing inside him and boiling at the same time. He crashed through Willow. He tripped. He caught himself on his bleeding hands and pushed up and kept going. Behind him, voices. "Whitlow, get him! He's cut. Barlow, you're after him, you fools!" He didn't look back. He couldn't. He only saw what was in front of him, twisted spruce, broken snow, the ghost blue dark of true winter night closing in around the hills. He stumbled down a short slope, and his feet hit nothing. He fell. There was no time to yell. There was only cold air and weightlessness and a single violent thought. Not yet. Then black.